Order.
Creator, may your spirit and guidance be in us as we work for the benefit of all our people, for peace and justice in our land, and for the constant recognition of the dignity and aspirations of those we serve. Creator, may you also watch over the people of Ukraine during these troubling times. Our hearts and minds are with them as through their struggles. Thank you. Amen.
Minister Statement. Northwest Territories Housing Corporation. Madam Speaker, November 24th, Ketjon Konate Naide, Di Zekeo, Mawokoin de Duten, Kotlin Dege, Quay, de Gaeagola Zeki. Masi, Dutsenesi, Nazekaresi, Ajon Zeki, Jimendadike Nita, Zehonda Ka, Ne Zungulia Gonde Zeki Gaita. Madam Speaker, March 4, 2021, Gondinio, Legislative Assembly, Governor North Territories, SC, 2 Northwest Territories, SK, Housing Cooperation Mission Statement, Daniel Chugozeti. Ka, members Kodi, Thon, Koze, Ka, Gio Guliagon de Zekesi, Ka Gundene, Sedatu, Senesi, Nazekadesi, the mission statement, Geneo. Kata, Jonsi, Legislative Assembly motion gets a coup got a do got a see car Roma Gaita, the corporate owned staff to got a council leaders housing working group to is it a got a kaditi the corporation take here. Is it a honor I see car make a in housing corporation take here. The new statement mission values got a morati zeki. Madam Speaker, mu morati zeki si. Client and a cutter are down to the downty wickets and the zeki gatan. Ejila the housing corporation is mega quick with the zeki gaita. Mezehonda si goes on a government to Nazakin Dion. Di Satse Koanito. Jitech casing, Hajitanide. Teachech casing la sea right tiny day, then a midi quick the key, down the gorati, down the nugget, down the rogoja, CC, let's say, hold on. Madam Speaker, teachech casing right that I'm a ton the Zugalite at the corporation J. Not that, Madam Speaker, teachech casing. Yundago around is a casing housing corporation target is a Ketakara. Tajini day has seen a charging gatan dazo to the government organization Yagunid. Kagodi Legalita, Indigenous government to govern Canada as a case. And in this white. Madam Speaker, the Nana Tennessee Sikoni. Only the corporation zeki kozeki tezwantegeti kageti aji zeki la down dirati zeki sitane kota zeki tu te kotinde na hetse mandate koni sila aron asigade corporation tageti zeki simeti honda the gaita the meta policies and programs la harada asi koni naita kotsechimeta corporation to public go Gavalagan signs go teacher Casey County Gaita. Madam Speaker, teacher Casey Mogomate Kadusi Megahauti, the Quago Connie Casey County needs a chew. 대 어제 뒤 아구들레 대 어제 에티 고가줄레 이제 개가래 권제 개시 메세니 렌데니 two legislative assembly ministry lisin housing corporation teke yisi la ko cha ko chang di ne se ko cha zo za si de la ta ke ko to sala ka ma shi ne se madam speaker ti che ke si yin da na ze ta ze ke gan si ko ga lang da ne se di members se ke ha mi ri yo se cheu gin de ze ke ko che ta di da ne zu nyu ji a yun da go di khwe ze ke e si tu te ko tin de a Masi, Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker. Masi, Northwest Territories, the KZ Housing Corporation, the KZ, Mr. Staff, Masi, could you see the Indigenous group, the K, and the RTC do La Taga in exchange, Masi. Education, culture, employment, Madam Speaker. Yet, Swatland. It's a K2 guy on day. It's a Kigatan, I wrote a KC, the indigenous government, the KC. I wrote an issue got out in the I wrote a KC, ya Tira Shagute. The KC and the zoo as a go to take the clay quizake than a yatis a KC metatate. Northwest Territories, Gay are Seaton, Makiasa Lagonao, the Zeke, Azoda Mia Zeke Zeke, Cloudy Yati, Zia Rometati, to the Cotin Day. Gao Deke, Aminaya, Gotanaya Day, Ijishuka, and Dake, Dene, Gotamaraqua, the Zeke Yati, Gonao, the Zeke Zika Metazati. Dina Yati, O Kiesi. Metaya tida the government kesu yeta get yatule ikogiri atule. Liga go jaka county me white with galida. 2021 Department Culture and Employment KZ OKC Tanasataya Tize KZ County Jin da Taiwagi. Jesi Masigodi Digo Tiden di Kochego Tana Tiasgon Tize KC. And then let's have the only see to lay go see you want a Zeke. That is the kick on down. Did only I see Megan Dani Day, DC, Megan is Junior hours ago. Get make a July 2021 Department see a Garganeto, the apprentice program deck. The organism. Two ya teacher KC la 200 to 200 jaja 8 months ko teshu yagino programs see March 2022 35 pairs see kandesi kaya wana ki teti teacher KC then ya ti in vaccine ko chen then kede kli chon ko te then shikline no tete si teacher ke ni de ga indasa. The programs that KG ya tida the Tiguagos and the Tetsikiajo, Mesela, Megagoya Tizaki, the Tlego choose. Madam Speaker, 2022, do Indigenous Language KG County Program. Do $5,000 scholarship to Kutazigo won't DJK. The Indigenous Language KG. DC do 31 scholarships already got to the lot. Indigenous Language Education Handbook 2021 Department HKK Junior go to grade 12 the teacher go to the go to the Tazela the school no she containers on to lay that shumorati go to make as a chumorat. It's a the handbook on target knowledge keepers. Go to the TZKZ, with the coordinator, with the instructor, go to Kotanesi, the Kotazikiwago, and to Tagin Dizek. Dizekezi Kandianazu, that Dizekezi condition are without a Dene Kiri, Kagi, Dene Kiti, and Da Kize Kisi, Haron, Hesi, Magazin, Da, Nago, Ceylon, Jet in Lodite. Tize Kesi, Mega Handbook, Sikago Tazalia. Dia Tize Kesi Kandin, Hinden Nizu. Nizaza Liazo, two good Jesi Kandi, the Jesi Kandi, Mega Godende, Kotsahuni Zu, 3 Madam Speaker. I am proud to Sahti Jones to take what in day nan. Got a chuti say a tida go say on da cow take its occasion. Is it a case that masi nitten? The roads a casing like you white and eaten. The yatis a casing, conal the casing, candid a casing a masi nitten, the undagoa. Is it down a zoom, candid a sisi nitiani. Tati zeke hesia si zeke ne zu gutri oni de masi nitea. Ja di meta kone zu azite di. Ta agent zeke si la ka agent ti zeke ni de ne zu asikyo de jon azoko. Ji kandini de ka ne zu azo ne junye te a. Da ji zeke da ga zan da de le. Di asikyo de jon la ya ti zeke ji masi. Hai. Masicho. Agent de Casey, Candico Yati, Conal de Tagi, de Cotin de Masico di Tiazago, is the Casey. Masi, Madam Speaker. Member statement. Tutte ne esiste the member statement che si gala the bacha. Esiste che si o agent che quevo cuse ne se ti se cotaze che. The agent che si WT Housing Corp che si candico si assiso guarda. Esiste che attendati. Onda, è giorno magari. Candico cacalati e giace mette gaudite. Candico ti me quesi cogliondi ni se o cacondi me go ole. E gidare si, Madam Speaker. Dite che sì, me que huti ciui se da me gasate in lani dene zua. Me zao dini de du na sate de chua me zazen dia zgon. Di digo zezi chuzi go zeni de me ga go se me ke go mo go ze go se di ze ke se tu le de si. Madam Speaker, du ji ze ke si kandi chi ze ke da housing corporation e di tiesa e kagana ta zgo. Agent public housing sego in lago di quest not a tete che si cala sego te hile. I gia si me ganta. I jon si se gama. Magato in dines. Ti oza si son. 90. Cosa su ti satante son pa me zati. Kyo ni un je me zan son pa tiondele. Tandia kade tize che si. Kade lite che 90, Madam Speaker. Agent che si ka me zazen dia zgo moti zeker. Ta kandi katin lani de machine se ya. Ji me kwezi chiu zego ze. Tu me ga kun konen au ze chin ni de ne zo de ne. Tu dan din an de estile. the constituents on Teraka Merkiko Siazagon, Merago, Teko Siazagon.
The member seeking unanimous consent to conclude her statements. Are there any nays? There are no nays. You may conclude your statement.
Closing, Madam Speaker, it is not right at all for our government to treat this constituent's situation of a natural disaster in such a different way compared to other victims of natural disasters in the NWT. I'm grateful that the flood victims
the government the minister died to Kennedy. Machine. Do Quago Yao Jin did the Honda. She chose Quago Senate, the government I get that was a go. The Quaja case here to take coating day Indigenous than a nugget daisy take. Ka Modichon. Ka at all they see Kago de G, not a day, the Quaja case here. Kakala with Indi me Magazanda Senate in Song Condition. We see the public housing zone. Down the diocese are Zoza at Zozagoti, Yundago. Dene Zhatıé Geni they got out digging any day down there got out delay is Yazi Mugurjane, the Quazacare. Dene Kelekada at the Kezi. Quay Geni, deux ans the government Italy see deux ans gutele. Kala Megaita as go, Mekanita Nakota Casio. Down Didala NWT Housing Corporation called Kazakendia. Down Madam Speaker. Titi Sitake Gatan Dani de Settle as go. Kodeti. Quincy out the Easter Kegani de Titana Shukan DC contract I Galagan Dani de Dulegozagendi. That do minister Canadasia. Do Tagai the Kyoka Condigo. Clearshu. Do Qi was another. Madam Speaker, Zida Minister see. The NWT Housing Corporation the case. A cow the sim. Editiasi Senia T to take out in there. Candigo da Titanesi Kuanayate. Indigenous Yakin is Yadandia Kiko Delan Diagoti. You only the Mola Quenza Kenagate, you include the Oza Modati. As long government law go to see. Titake. Dana Zakin Diazagon, you must see.
Member statements. Member for Frame Lake.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. On January 25th of this year, there was another announcement about funding for 29 houses being built in small communities. That's all good, but it got me thinking about the federal co-investment carve-out for $60 million that was set aside for the NWT. After the last cabinet failed to make housing a priority, we got very little under the National Housing Strategy, but that's another story. Recently, I got an accounting of the funds spent and used under the NWT co-investment carve-out. $25.5 million of this amount was allocated.
The 2 year old on the Mogoko says that the down the Quincy go lago lato take out in day. A tanet is on Balametseki, a tanet is on Balaketi. Tanet e la tule meta tule the nation the Quincy now the Izaki Yathala. The Calamodichon I'll go on to 10. To take out in day any day, Quayago Lani de la Car, Sena the Ias gone. Dala Mega Somba Yatha la Son, and do a Jonte Cacondile. That is a case condini de la construction which you the other go that planting, go that Quincy now the Itake Gani did the Kayan. You the down this on Bathela, government ze kesi ya megai ta ze kong tu te ko tin de ze ke ya ta kwe ko koni ze ke ga ni de ko de ti 500,000 oza ta ko ti za situle ne za thite situle te oza kwe ze ke ji chena ze I de ke ga ne za ni ni ta tu te ko tin de ya di kha de sa ga ta ze kong ko ze ni de kha tu le NWT Housing Corporation is in Katule Yego Kaya Geti. The Ozen is what's there, the Ozen Gogan there, Kotsagan there, public education. Not the minister that do Kennedy, Tizaki, Machine. Shishuka Kwego Gusenese, Politics. The Oze Tiaja Politics 33 people like Taganite. Can do quite the guy in. Do 81 homes on it. That is a crazy la 23 units a key to note in like a day. That is quite a key is the other. Do it and a Yinan de on the Nana Queen. 17 people got not get a quega, is usual. That is the case you got under. 10%. It seems that 10% who connected the Noki Quego Tele. In Dana, you could quench a nugget, they go family saw it a nugget. That is the case got under. You see, click she the case one that had an age not the good ye, can't day. That 81 quiz a good day, he got on la down dear the quiz care. That is the case, got 81 quego law 22 the key, not a dear go only. Sena Titlanes, Yaranda. None than la card, they cannot indeed with a Ronak indicating the Sena get to the card. That is the case Randa. The nation can't is a case. United Nations Plaza in the car. Good 35,000 government quota. They are so good in there. Car. A take like that. Quite a case can't be said it as on. Is the case. A CC gaita, me only get the gaita down the Kani de County gaita and Denizua. Could they eat the Tekea? Ta he the county quay or send out the Tande, Clegalite Tande, Nezuanes, Iguales in the Masi. Great slave. Madam Speaker, the la Magogo Sela di Quetekeo. Santira Tenesi Cantisi, Yal Navicalo de Casey, go line dati then. The Son Queen Candisi goes on the Ayaichi. The 28% of Casey Candisi. To take Canada, Yigo, any day, Candiga line that. A road the Casey Candisi landlord in lay, the Aro Candaji. A rock on Dizzy Kiwa in the Dene Candian. That is the Casey, la Quaza Casey, Mogot and day. That send out the little Kigani day, Magazan Dani day, Nezua, to take out in there. Candinas was out to lay. Arron hesi tenetagini disease meke auti atule candio cacontilent tu good lilandi agute tati son baisi taniti lazy metadi dia de co 60% na jati iji tiontele tati corporation which jati itago tedi tietu et lazatella cause the weekly candy, young lives a weekly at Zonzagon. Young life is 35% cause house staffing is connected on to wound. Cause do Gulia go down the Kisi Garden that the pandemic, you are the other the Tiago down, the other I see Quentin of the Kisi Diadan. That do she could easy, Quenas and Diago de Jago chat. Is it 486,000 clear Queen Cago de the tea. That the other she had 22% Dia John. He thought the young lads the Kenas and the Annie de Godiji. He thought the Kedas 338 people. She Kakala, ye Kagana town, the Kakala, the Tontan, the two dark, and the Yago, the Kesi, Ishago, Lagui, and the Jugu Tars go on yen. 42% he sees the KC cut the age 24 to get the guy 104 tuta ta magazan tani de 90% he see la act la zhe de sion de kan du ka gon di le the young life the ke la ka gon di o go ku li ko thala ta gon di son is the ke ga zan da Quentin Candy sent out the place, sent out the ego, and the any day, says the years ago. That over the was idea. Tizeke Candy go de G, Candy the KC, the government the KC in landers on the Massy. That's true.
And concerns about the rising costs of electrical power and heating fuel usage to all the rent.
The ED corner shoe, Keshu, Metanushigo corner shoe, Whitley Tiaja, is you come around that too. As long as the Kisia, could they tell the Aron diesel fuel the Kyo Whitley Tiaja, do pellet target, I go chat and that is a key, take her to the city line is your
Apartment buildings. This is like replacing, if you have 5 houses, you got 5 furnaces, you got 5 fuel tanks. That's a lot of fuel usage. When you put a central heating system, like a wood pellet boiler, you can connect all 5 units, which is saving you, you can realize significant savings then.
The two should like boiler target. Can't go the pellet target line it to the wrong. Take a chat is it seen at the Randa Dule. The others are some by kicking the tea at Dule, can't you pellet targets in line there. The gas Casey continued who learned the that Dule could the tea at the ladder. "2014 cannot Dene Zhatıé Minister Hemelacy Yagin Leasing the wood pellet boiler system at to Leketile. To Hemelacy Minister is a case. Is you kaya chu kitauti make out there? Is you what is? Menandi. Dule. Do Whitley go de tia go down there, and now did not the day any day. Go to rent to deal there. Ita Kala is equal mentati quite tale, the 19 Assembly a good. Ita not the minister tied to Kene, the Tizeke or Masindi. Tu Tennessee ni da could it shoot the case Kogane la Taganesa. The son but the refinance at $40,000. Is it a na Tatagan nature? the queen the she to the is naganila long is some by sea yet target is Uli the Yaki Estio Tele. Daji the Kesi Gatanda Housing Corporation is he. Editia Ki Hade Etantia Security Queta Kesi Seniagiti Housing Corporation. Do it go Tageo, Kit and Negozogendele. Ki the county seat the Kesi Gatanda. Din da Quia Holy Shuki Nezuko Holy on Tele. Itaji the Kesi Gatanda as a gone. Did they go to India? Ka Magaita on the Oze Shigatanda. The nation continue the Housing Corporation Dicanale, continue Queen Wagutagiti, Gokiagiti, Estio Tele. Ti down dinagati go Condisitago Tautio Tele. Magatanda on. None the nation la ka Duida ka etunetin and nugget deagusha. Dagavije Honda ki Quenco Zelagoti. Is it a Kedati Housing Corporation? Canete son Basin Danigi de Quenze Casia, 140,000 on. Ita Gigotan etunetin la Dandina Yandia. Chitandi Modisho, I need a DAC la ka Metagotaitia. 2017 ko Shiko se Quenze Casigazan. Du la Tauti. Tati te Kego Shugazanda. Aji te Kizila Kako 9, Temechego 9, dear Candia, to se Que 9, Nanden di Candiu Cagondia Gusta, Estion dele. Atene Asi te Kizi Candisi, Randani de Razandazo Dane de Kizio. Titane Queen again, Dishi the Ozago de tea. The Oze Siaco Dande. De Tia Dande. Hita tu Magazanda Koza Dini Dene Zhatıé. Quenshu. He hutli 9 dile Kamodash. Kode Tidan. A San Tida Magatanesi. Kadi Ran Dani de Yakana Tide the Queen on Dizeke. And you say the oil is what the Leatule. That is a Keda Housing Corporation is a car, Yaganda, Sazaki, government the case you can't do programs in the year, Titanetake. Because they all the case you, Guli Corporation Landi, Coca-Cola. That is the case you public the Tiza Kotaza Lali, that Madam Speaker. Housing Corporation is in Tandiagi take a Kiziki Tanaka Chada Gurazagan Tintenezua, continue to let the Nesi Quen Kogaguta Kotazandi, the Tute Kotin there. Cannot the Ministry Housing Title Kennedy Massin. Yellowknife North. The mortgage rent in Diagon public housing sector, government Sakai Gure, the housing allowance tiny desert dule. Ajiwa Kandigu Comicurijo, public housing is in the guy the tea. Kandigo to take AC 885 want 7.3 million a year. Got you the condition taken at the reality housing rentaki. The condition to the public housing doesn't say change the owners. The only condition, the next condition, the Quaco Chini, then is what it Kakaditi, Kaditi, or Jesus Kiatelia. $7.3 million in Gisela. The Sandia Metati did the Kini Kazin landed to lay 100 on the Quinco. the minister died to Kennedy Jackson. She died all of the county public housing each year. A died all of can on it each year. Do doughty. Do market rent go the agudeti. Easy. On the public housing at each line day, some bagadi tia tule. Mercy, Madam Speaker.
Member statements. Member for Cam Lake.
Cam Lake.
Of the world. 2 years ago, I stood in this House and spoke about the rising costs of construction, healthcare, and the vulnerability of the North to surprise events.
Okay, Ryan Day, the Quenat Tete rent Mogo Quinde, go de tea are gone there, they see. You can damage her weekly tion, the common cudicho. Is it a case I'm a right as go, got any day Mogo the time then is. Canteen the Jones had to lay quite a case to lay make a son banity. Ah, got you. Ita yisi la ti te kya ye tene gala ki te te kesi tagu te ni te seko te lea tu lea le ko tsa tsen ti ni te. Kan tene zoza tu te ko tin te ki kwensi te tiago on le. E tiago on la. Ne sini ti aaz go. Ti tu son bayasa la te ke se lao te in kwense ke gazi 80 million te la. Ishida tu lea sit leon. Tu le a rogo taze kesi ko zaiti. Tu tsene tangdi ko zaiti si kecha. Istile. Iji oza zule. Ita di Housing Corporation esi. Kati ze kesi gagenda. Tu te kotlin de ga kwensi. $500,000 ko zang te kiti. Adeo o tidi la yasala. Hi ko sana ze kesi la. Tangdi indigenous government si zaiti ze kesi gaita zon. Nezua ze lani dendi da di ze ki kanti se ti lani de katule azele NSN indigenous government ze keta antini de tule ko ekle me ko taiti taji ze ke aron esila ka moti a mentadi ke zene ta se ze le azgo di kanti de zo Corporation esi tu le ko zagendi tu le ko zauti di federal ze ke son bait antini te tu le shu senyu di ati ko ze ke si sena ko ze si ze ke yundani za gu te de ko ni te ka tu mo ni si kandi ga ji lani te a ron te ne si hone ni a tu le ko ka konti len Mercy, Madam Speaker, ti te kesi hatsanda. Aron te kesi esi ta tse sa di kandi se na ze I ze ke ni dendi. Haver North. The indigenous language of Gusenet. Tizekesi Nakishu. 2022, 2032, what is it? Is the indigenous language of Kesi as a home. Sandesi Nunita as a home. Ita Tizekesi members, see, you go in the Tizekesi. Ita the young life south Kesi. Kandisi Randa. The endage go to kayak tea, you can't do what is ya teasing. To meet there with a metati, did your own members say, to ye get they go ya tigo and Dene day, shut out again land and machine. Dene day are around 21 members as ideas. Assembly see, to le go ya tiaget. Hey, Yende as a condition. Madam Speaker, 2 are around members as seen. Nishu ne ya tie dati kandi ni te etana zandi masi Nahende. Merci, Madam Speaker. Eji dite kesi o 1931 Bill Rowe Megundi. Itaji teke. Eji Bill si ka tene si menandi do ye walk on de Bill Rowe. Eji lati ka Honda Saudi get Honda Tlige de tinle editi. Titi mo ti sia zozi si go zandi. Ta kandigo ye ona te Honda Santi Magaye de ko jakade ja ko ja ye ona te to desi road construction go editi ya unise. January 20, 1952. Belasin. Iji li hichu ko te songlandi me te Honda 67 years old who shagati Belasi ka hutli menazandia Belen Rita 30 years as he do te gotlin degia gati. Kota Alberta te agecha ejama nakate ko loisi kota. Kadio kato te no gite kota ni kota gite kageti. Ishi kota farm training te kota ni kota gete. Ta Tadiki kodi chatu te gotlin de te kiyo kota kati. Tenesi ne zugo kizen ni te keta ne zugo kizen dia to yugo konde. Ta jite keta Madam Speaker jite kesi bilisi kamorish. Ita kadi timoti si ajo ha metere ko ni de kai na gendia di masin. Ka ko the family ko ka ye di tikaditi.
Questions? Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Replies to budget address, day 3 of 7. Replies to budget address. Member for Nanakput.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Tutsene Nanakput ke megoguse the budget ke siwo 17 million 4% GNW2 ke sin Nanakput at the Ejiteke Aboriginal budget la tanete onde Nanakput ke Tijake sin ta tisi megoshi kadeshi ki dala ki kandi services me ki metskotelandi da indize ki edeko the engineer si edi kandi si yuda ni chutis the gase ke sia ta the services megako tazko Kote ji tute nakhi the services ke gande the 11 sete liazgo ambulance transportation bus kotaze ke ji ro seta le kwenze ke yoda 11 le cha the riding ye ta ji te ke gazanda ita ti ta kweshu tana son ke kwena ke te ji te ke shu gazanda the riding ye Kote ji the younger family ga taundi ji te ke si meganda de ko ita mega ko ko je a ko zai ti a ko ta te ke si ko la ka se se di 29 je ki onda ge de estile taundi kanete tanai sta ge ini taundi a le housing corporation si na hitso de na hizatitele yon local government chuagite in the Valley Regional Corporation Deck is yet a ron is you go on the quasi coate le ke sound diraji coate in London. Indeed, the case the ke la government go giton ko ja si the ke Dali Quaita, Somba Zeke, Som Baisi Zeke, is corporation Zeke Gazanda. Ichi Inda Nidago Lisa Zinlani de Dule Quego was a lazy Zeke Wallace. Yui has in Laden is your weight liska. Cantigo Ka could make a good day, make a say good day as I'm doing be. He has in Laden. That's a family in a yard. Take a two dance, 2 for cook in Jitaki a seat lock on the Yagola. Send ye constituency. Quite a kegani de ka ne zun quaco de tiago. Since I go the business partner Nita. I did the Nego Galagan dadile. Teacher Casey Candias in Lani de Tule and the Seolines and the Indani Dago Asia Kandi has in Lade Sezandi as all this riding out Sezandi. To a tunot in a dequeniac deteke. The $340,000 quego get the Kikone Zukundale, a stile. Tisi, Kachuisi, Megotata, the region zekeda, the Quezeke, a Roma Gana tiny day, Dule Ajitani, the Kemetaniti Liatule. Tutezeke, Nag put zeke the co, she the Quazin Lanazo. Contazeke, Naki Quatiti, Quatiti, Housing Board. Jisi Kandi Contago Galagan Dazi Kazin Lani Denizwa, the Portake. Tati Tanesi Kandisi, Sago Tanagade, Jitawaris, Taki does in London is Ranasedi. Da Eta Kandi Kaguchandin is Ulin, say Jiwara City Quatake. Tu ka kwete keisi kokiata desi eta kone zua kote te onze kone zuna te te ani te kwene zugo ta zago kanti sa gai ta zago andende zo tanesi kandi ni te tule ko zao ti ze keta ko zazen dia tule ma ne se tu tsune ko ti zo Tene kandi si go zao di de ne jo. Yo ze ke tene si kandi ye na ye ga kan da da sa kandi go. Na ki ka zong kandi si na da di kandi la ze de kwen ze ke. Na ki kandi ze ke Starbucks KFC kandi na zo da le. Northern Store kai ji zo. Yo ka na ne zo. Asin be na di ze ke ga ni de. Hadin deko Tanesia Kandisi Gazanda government 35,000 Gotanti Tanesia. A Josie target you until the common Gurash. Tati de Ke Warasi. Tati Quete Ke Gashi Gazandani de Nezua Tisomba Zeki. Sanson Basi Zeki Gazandani de Connect AC Tule Sete Lake Ticadio Tanasonaya Tende Codigi. He was say Nezuma Gazandas go. Haji doesn't eat the case, Haji doesn't eat the case. Kakala Nahi riding G. Kamikurisho. Hutli the side gite, Masi Kageti, Yegona Zagan Diazati. Tatule Natazan di Yazana Himaku, Masigonite, Tule discute che Kotaze che Dugo Zaiti, Simaran Danet. Nana Oti si Kandi, Yendago, I see, Kandi in line de Queen Nagatin, Kikago Tiadere, Juarez. Da di Quete Casey Candina had saying de Ka. machine idea as go. Tazo tana tonga tada said, Nishanake Dereko, Nahichunu Shenaite, Nadetija, a Zosa, she, as a Zezokote, the Zezokote, Tauti, Mikeko de there, Tant Olamoana Titia, Tagoze de Kereko, he could in the zone. Minister too, is the Kizikulia to Lendi Masiati, to 18 months color Nakinarasella. It's a Kego City Tani Dene Zhatıé, the housing Zeke Radissin. Take a light as go. As well take a light time, the Zozatu le Candia Cicetel. Nahi, take a light as go in Nahedesi. Ka, and Denezo, not Senurita, Cason Batala, Karuquan Dele, Shinaguate, Masi.
Replies to budget address. Replies to budget address.
Hair South or question. Masi, Madam Speaker. He dundi many said, Titamo Kaya Tizekisi. To the Kato de Herzeki Ayen. Itasitandi Modi Shoala. Izi Kandi Quincy Ogosia, He and dia do lily Zeki. Tutamo Gosation. Coteni demo all the she right dule, Tanti at the Lezekias. In Lany de Hon Dule.
Minister responsible for NWT Housing Corporation.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to the member for the question. The Housing Corporation intends to use this property for future seniors housing development in Hay River. I want to assure the member that the Housing Corporation recognizes the importance of working with the community leadership and many housing partners to support the seniors housing needs in your community. The Housing Corporation has taken
Housing Corporation, Ka, Azoyan Dadi Ganata, Denego Zogende, Dizeke Sego. Kaldini de DC, Otiri on Dalaya de Zeke de Coca, Secozelliatileco, Yundago, a continue tenio. Quenzeke Rani de Ajon Yundago, I see, Gazan Terrazago on the Massi.
Down the road, and I hope that's not the case. Madam Speaker, can the Minister tell me when will the apartment building known as the Hay River Singles be replaced with the new complex? It is aging, I know they do work to it, but it's almost as old as me. Thank you.
River Singles are tied to accuse in East the title at the
Housing Corporation.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Based on the current Housing Corporation's unit condition assessment, the corporation anticipates being able to operate this facility for at least
Kala Sulaga was an idea, these cases Dandi, Mekaneti, Tonte, or a corporation ageti, is the care. The members seem Katha was an or the zone conductor. Here go down the Quincy Gasio. The car, I see the chart Quincy Gasio. And
River South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. At 65 years old, I don't have much time left, so I want to see something done. Madam Speaker, can the Minister please explain to the Assembly the process for her department to take over existing
Mr. Department la down the Quincy Gasicato Taser Kigo to Botanajo, Gotin Degasi, Koyago Liza the Kyo, down the Gogalaganda is a chemical genre. Got a talk on the is a case machine.
Minister responsible for NWT Housing Corporation.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to the member for that question, because we do have a number of federal units across the Northwest Territories that will become vacant, and as a
看到关心看的现在在对岸的马下的，可 federal government 的一些一个的这个钱，以及大看你的 federal housing unit 的是看对了没打着的，他的看的还容许了米这样的 Indigenous government 这样的，或者你的 federal government， 或者你的 territorial government， 或者你的quota看第二个人，他都是在给他看的在给在那个你的开业大的个呢，他那个讨论过这个的啊，这个 housing corporation 的啊，个了大是在给是个大这是啦，这样来的。
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary, Hay River South.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And this final question she'll probably answer in a couple of days from now. But can the minister tell this assembly how has the objectives and direction of the NWD?
The corporation 在给了当地啊，国家国家印地有起开过这些，或者当地了看他是现有的案。
Minister of NWT Housing Corporation.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I hope that my minister's statement on the new mandate for the Housing Corporation.
Housing Corporation 在给些，看这些人大的跨境大，上国家国家在给个个呢，一个干的系统，的 motion 在起，第二 march， 一个是看没事啦。开种个啦，在那些看的是一个福利一个规的，一大是在这些来看的你的看个讲那个的在我在你的看在啦，可没那些是那在看当地种用大个啊的在这些 housing deliver 那强的都在过程的，都在一些。个那些个真的，这些现实给你的看着这些啊，都过这些啊，90 units 才是的，啊，让没完了的安排他们给你装90 units 是钱你的 public government 的去看，一个二三大给你的还是讲。
And I just want to thank the federal.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I also would like to ask questions of the Minister of Housing. In the government renewal strategy process that the Housing Corporation is undertaking, how is the department going to work with the private sector to address the skyrocketing cost of housing?
Housing units
Responsible for NWT Housing Corporation.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The corporation fully complies with the GNWT's procurement.
Corporation laka the policy ta koga lagenda the public sector kwaya gidi keze ke gani de. Tu kan diago yagola ko ze ya ro ko ga ta kai ni la tan di non-profit organization lagi tere ko. Ha jong etandi mekani tha di housing ko tha si kliani de ka metse karushi yi te ke ni de asi li te ni de ti de ko ha rong ko kan na ko kani tha zo ti te zo ke go on de le yen di masi.
Thank you, Minister. Member for Great Slave.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate that, but I mean, if we have an open RFP process, but there's only one landlord, it's pretty much guaranteed where it's going. So just a comment. An issue we hear time and again as MLAs is the lack of land that is available for development in the north. So what is the department and the minister doing to work with GNWT colleagues on getting that land transferred to the city?
GNWT Minister Kogalanda, Masin, Ka Ejite Kejimo Kadusi, Housing Corporation is Ka, Edition, Yalaz Kejin, that's a Kagazaki. Ita Ajita Kitani, Zita Harder Diners or Corporation Zat. Da Tizaki, and Dezaki, Rani de membership movement, a cushion, a season, a gotin, Desataze Chuzaki, Rani de Dano Dani de membership Mesita Dule, Zaki.
Slave.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Yeah, that's fine. I do recognize that it's a complex situation. As I spoke to earlier in this session, constituents want to see social programming available on-site in their buildings, such as the model at YWCA's Rock Hill House. So is the department working to identify spaces within
Did that do the Quebec Kandi, Senator, Itake, Tony, this spaces, Yagundi, Tekiago, the Leala. She make you Siko Gala and Diane. Ka Tizake, la Ka Mago, Cote Kaditi, Diaron, the Ketata Tizake, the Quebec is out to lay to take out in there. Nezunyuzi a program tashugo zaiti kanti isigan dazo disikaligo galantani de the low income housing families the kesi gades in the masi.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I will also be tabling a document today which has some commitments about availability of social programming for youth, so I hope that the Minister will take a look at that. My last question is that in my riding I have 2 vacant lots where apartment buildings once stood.
2 vacant lots at this constituency. Ijila Tandia, she do let make a coin out the GNWT the Kenagan Dini Dendi. Machine.
Thank you. Minister responsible for NWT Housing Corporation.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to the member for the question, because I had the similar question in Hay River South as well too, in looking at replacing units throughout the.
Tinda question Mikia Tule Ko Kala Mega Somba Selala. Ita is the Kandia Moda. Kandigo the Quete Kesi Kitugo Gayagun Lisi Kandia Katule Mekenizi. Kandigo Gondeo delle Egite Kesi Gatan Dazagon. Kotago da Cella Kisa Gondigo, Quegon Deji Gite Kesi Gatan Dazagon. Tajite Keni de Meta at the Tiani de Tutile Alberta Nazagan Diatule Tizekeo. Corporation Chu, the Diago Tazas Lago, Edit Jugo Diazagon. Tizeke, the Cleta Hard Diane.
Member for Tabacha.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, specifically, only 1 home was destroyed in my riding for the situation of my constituent. So that is why this case was handled differently. Does the Minister believe that any victim of a natural disaster whose home was destroyed
this constituent or did not the Koyan machine? Talo si te ke chi kwen me te hone ta chiu ze ni te ka yami li ma go chaji ka ko ke li de sia kan ti te ke chi ta ti te ke chi gan da kwen te ke chi so me ta tu te ko tlin de chiu ze ka me kyo de ta ji te ke sa ka ko chai ti a ze ko on a media ki te ke chi o kan ti go ti chi Duisi la jite keisi la metako zai tiani de guli ze ke di te zeni de azgo. Ta jite ke ni de members ke ta mona ze ta gutene ki khada gu chani dendi. Ta corporation ze keisi gani de Gagan Dazon do Jim Reed Kiwa Hosha Din Quentin with it. Didn't Macy the Honda. Ichigo was sent out zetly. Ite Kigazanda. Some but the Honeta Agute. Gotana de thing was a declaration the Siazagon. I was any day. Ka Nikani Tagadagasgon. That is a queen. Kukedi Lijike Oshimekani Tagarza, Kantia the local housing authority Kantia, a sea galagenda. But any day Queen de Kashi di Quegowagi, Le Kenyazi, Le Kandigo, a sea gazana Tagarden deson. Cotetan the Sagazanagala easy Guago Gately de Siazon, Kandio Ka, Kogozao TC Yendi.
Thank you, Minister. Member for Tabacha.
Madam Speaker, can the Minister tell us if the NWT Housing Corp considers natural disasters that destroys people's homes on a case-by-case basis, or is there a uniform approach from the NWT Housing Corporation in dealing with people's homes destroyed by natural disasters? Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Tanti Gagana Tati Kagoti the Kani, the Quinky Lize Kiradin. Tanti la make it dandian. Iji la Kamaga di Tle Nahetsen. The Kasiga, the Wadin de Hare, go Quawut any day. Nahioshu can't desi, Quincy, Chimi the Le. Ita corporation is go Zakendi. Ijake, Hidi. Can do the capital budget on it. That is the case. Ka Kodicho, Kakotite Kasiak. Ita Ka that Indian the Canedeto. Ka the Tleta Hadani Deson. Cantini de Tule, Gitamo Gunde the Kasi Seditli, with the policy Gulian. Down the Aguchazi the Kasugaita. Mentalic is in a town and the machine. Tandi Tenehiki Tandi Tikakoti the Kenny Day and the Arroli on the Ilene Senso. Masi Madam Speaker, Housing Corporation is Ka Gozaiti Tita Guaguchate Kesia. Private homes and the Laguli. Kandigo Kana Zekadindi. Ka Santi Rasi Goga Laita and Tita Megashu and Dale Quaita. Nezuko community any decade Danet Gozide Kenise Chadi Legacy Lazi Kemezini Nichu, Kandia City. Dina has a policy that Hada Kathiyan, the private homes at Kayani. Masi.
Would like to be treated fairly and receive a fair rental monthly fee for the unit he is now in. This type of policy is something I would like the Minister to investigate and think out of the
Minister Yendadiganita Mendadiganita, the NWT case natural disasters, Deni de Situle Metzao di Sompa Zeka compensation at Lana Atandi Ayen. Masi. The case la camo make a galata. It's a case you. Tano Deni demo again at the goose and the machine.
Thank you, Minister. Oral questions. Member for Montfouille.
Merci, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, iyi wake got dahi chikeda dekawo gitsunitle wala dedi ho gintle hunte hani deketle du haziela na geddehi du lallon gitsunle ego tso du hi slonsum baitsinle hani nitle wala hani ko hodatso e wat hetso e kurz agede und dwagint e housing corporation e illa nitle gella nitle hani atle gella sumbani hitsuleni de dega sumbatsin lerinde dega asi na tira dega sumbafalla lende nihikegu ale hani nawo hani falla hute weket hani teketle hani
di da si due go zao di ge di kandi ze ke di te go ze ze hona da na ne de ne si go zao di go ze sa ze ke go zao di le e ti on de le na hi la dan di da kandi si in ben da di kwai da e dan di da la ko ta si go zao zen di ya e di tle da go di ni de ka go da go zao di de ni e ti ya ze lia ze go won di ma si da ka me kyo di chong de kya yin ko ta si de kya yin la ya gun li di policy si ka mo go za da ze go ida da ji te ke te ne za gyun di ge ni ze ni de ko ta ze ke ni de a rong sa ma ga da zo di kwe ze ke na ne te ne la ka la di mortgage da ze ke de ti ji ze ke si你一当地啊人的，现地方的，你来你鼓励呢？他的拿了的那些，可他那个东西，让他那个的求鼓励呢，也这样的嘞，亚大就看那些马戏。Masi tu member ka ti ko the corporation si a ron de ke si o di le se ga chu ko des in le di ta ti de ke si me se nu ta ni de ko de di government anaute se di si tu le se le kan ju ka di son ba si de ke ga ta ze go me kya si ti ya ze go di de ke si i ta ji si la di on ko ja ti go de na hi na ja di ta di member si no de ni de mo ze gu se den di ma si.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Member for Montfouet.
Merci. La hagin la ninde don't gin nane. Ita so it dikat
Kashi niega kachi in lani de itati county je ke o ki je ke se la chin lan din ne jani mashi ka ne che ka din di ka kala 248 mortgage fund ke ga la ita ishi shi khiao ne ta ze mi ta the ni ki te chi ya ko ga la ita ta no te ni de mo ne ze ko sha tu le so ni go na wa ni de yan de mashi.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Supplementary, member for Montfouet.
merci. Would the government commit to an ombudsman for the housing corporation?
The housing corporation ze kesi situle di tleke ni ze chuta ke di ze kesi kandia ze le ataun di yen. Ji tue ne ze kadesi tu tsene kandia no te me utane se desi 세대존 메시 다니 때 둘레 론데 계주 다 디지 제 계주 잔티니 마시.
Minister, final supplementary, member for Montfouet.
Mercy, thank you. I'm looking forward to the meeting. So when is the Housing Corporation Policy Review going to be completed? Will the MLA and community...
Tanto oggi la utese che in da chicatule magari tali Ka la taga ni chua di tutsele.
Sharing that with Standing Committee and all MLAs, so we could...
Dene de tule MLAs ko gani te dice che capitani dene. Masini. Nenak put MLA di la da si metara di tu kan DC 29 application nagire. Da is the minister la situle se te kati di som di quente che sigo. Che sembra che kati atule. Iji da quen okiono da nesi nagire di pole taxi jiwares. La taga ni ochune se tu tsenesi di quente che o. Ita ejite che si la di public government si kote kage dia tu le ka federal money si ka tu te na jan dia ka mi kyu di jo. Ta I quente che su kote ka tu di mo kote gute. Ta di members si ka 4 units si at the politics che din quen ho lea che si okyon da saudin di go ka tu si no teni de member mo kote go sen di machine.
The Indigenous government's got $34 million into the NWT. How does it work in regards to getting them and holding them accountable for?
Etandira na ze kota ze kesi la ki kwen goagi a in leni kwego ze chia son bagoagi leta etandia ge aji zeni ze da khada lage the government si the indigenous government ze kesi the son ba ze ki federal son ba ze ki federal son ba si go ja ti ni de the GNWT agondi. 이제 개atu에 간디시 간디라 가곤디 데시아고 오래 노테 아시제 계지 가전 다음에 가전에 타제케가 다 member라 IG identity federal money federal government ke identity any day 예시 카틀레고 그게 근지를 그거 갈란다 디제케 이지존을 코카 Nahidandi Housing Corporation information like any day, Kotagora Telete Kezi Dandi, Goga Laita, Jura Kanti Gaitandi Masi.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the co-investment fund is $34.5 million. We have to hold our local Indigenous governments accountable. I'm Indigenous and we need houses in our communities. We need them sooner than later.
Nahi son pase la si kaji se la kandio yiki me ke dati go ze dandia ko ta sele du yun de zen de tlawo tia ko dan de si ko ta ze ke si di housing corporation go dandi la de dati na hili na tla ze go na hina tla ze go oni de dandia son ba ji se la ni de dandio 키고 다 selgo ze imike da tiago le kon. The federal funding is the indigenous groups go targeted Kotagela. To take out in day, I need a kakala go on the son by need. The governor's territory stand they are going. Katule indigenous group that. That is a case on. To take out in day in the she can't do the case. To make a go she's at the federal government the Kereko. She's on by the Kenazat.
That we had acquired the 25.5 million through the National Co-Investment Fund in trying to address
5 million co-investment fund kesela ijitamo kaya ne tizekezi. Ijila tule beta 60 units zetsi. Tute gotlin there. Kandi go federal zeke son bachina zati zizi ko tasi dale ijizekea. Corporation a ko zati hane.
decide. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yep. What is your point of order?
Appropriate for a member to be asking a minister from the GNWT to be accountable to federal money that is given to
the government the premierati is si human che kayati ne seo di tatia di simicure jane sendi masi.
Thank you. There is no point of order.
The key point of order hule. Put.
Today, we're just short houses in the communities. And money's been given. We got, like she said earlier, 34 million, 66 houses for the Aboriginal governments, and another 30 or 60 for our territorial government. 120-something units, Madam Speaker. We need that.
Dice che si la di somba ne la si me che vade gata tanti di quote si sanno già chi cacciu mo na tu tele kazan da chi mo che sente mo tante solti te sa con delle giware sindi.
I really am encouraged by that word, and it speaks well to the wood pellet boiler systems that I bring up. And it's not just a word exercise to me, but it's to help the minister and the department.
Tia tikait le zekeni dela department minister si ko idea di diale ko gata di dia di dile. Dice che on etse se ka tikadusene se Madam Speaker.
One letter from the minister responds to my oral question on
Minister Dadi ke di biomass ke si home te kaya ti march ke da indi gae di da di corporation si do yega energy action plan ke lian legeti ko te chu me report ke si di tu kya ka di May 2021. Minister, si tu le tu yikena kote yitekeo. Di 2021 doza kadin juli zandia tu kare sata tien.
Member or Minister for NWT Housing Corporation.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I would have to get back to the member. Thank you.
Member si mo geta metela ko tene yitekeo yendi.
Let's see, Madam Speaker, yeah, and I believe they were saying that the report would have been another year or something in the making, but
Hakala tiga no dedi igote kage tiula kandini dendi. Du kotela tako tizeke minister si tule si di clay si teke for province teke si di clay holy. Itaji teke si di la kota teke tene si kandi jindari tleni chu. Meta department la si tule ye kana taji teke go masini. Iji members is the case on Danet, Condigo, Ka, somebody case gala, Ka, do the Gotlin de Gani de, Ka, Condisi, Condi, Asita, and Yevik Simpson, Haver for Liard, Kotewati, Kotechu, Iji Biomax, Gani de, Ka, Biomac project, Asita, join young life. June is a case I could the 4.8 public unit is he can't just hit that come one it. It here a clavic for resolution the data and Beshako can't just hit that the machine.
or lease to rent unit, whether it is a single dwelling or an apartment complex. I note that the corporation does not stipulate any direction as to cost savings to the corporation. A lot of new ones were the market housing and also the ones to the RCMP. You know, for the provision of providing biomass, using biomass heating systems to these new units.
The biomass target is a case metano sheko kota kiasi o ki kweza onja. Is a case the ministry mogone say the claim de is a case. Tati kasi koni the ki kwen koni gani de la siji kanti target ya yeni. Is it a case Josanate se chule ko the megai that the ketu te kotlin de the ke gani de esi kanti gani de the tayo kon de the case tanet is a unit de siki jomike de shole ko no temo me ke tal me ke na tsena ko tene. The country moko sendi te a todo guli sia siwa na gete. Ichita the kota kota tele te kesi ministry sit sako the contract wagi a pellet boiling system. Bite kesi o. Ichi kanti la contract o oni dene zua. Ute kotlin de te kesi kwe gadesin. Member o the goza the ka mekyo de shon. The pellet boiler system zeki. Ka dile tandi meteni se ta khare ta san ko tse si ji se la ka za ta se la li the pellet boiler zeki. Sikimori shole. Tandi agu te si tu te ko tin de zeki. Ta tu te mo go me tse la gu te ne ji zeki si o ye. Ni te dile mentali kwa in tata khani ke tamo ke tse me tse la gu te ne ni. Frame Lake.
Can the minister confirm that the NWT carve-out funding has now all been accessed and will result in
la city ministry when I take what the that's called funding the town la the tycoon let the casing and the masi. Is 60 million is kaki with 25 million is a Biohouse Corporation. Because any day to 60 units gets. They got in there. Because 34.5 million is by Mr. Government. This is a case public government is a case when I say cutting there is 34.5 million is a case. Indigenous case la. She wasn't the nation. To lead the nation, Santiago say she's on Basat is 34.5 million. Masi.
Frame Lake.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. I want to thank the minister for that. And of course, it's good news, but I wonder about the cost of these units. The average cost of the units appears to be about $520,000. Can the minister explain how this compares to previous new builds undertaken by the NWT Housing Corporation?
NWT Housing Corporation that's holy is a case la dandia and the case going dashi ka go de ti you that's the DC order that the Housing Corporation is condition the order they tell the connected go you take down that the federal funding the Honda the corporation the Kegani de Kakala go the good days the Kego the get the Kake the go the construction the Kegani then the right done. Corporation the KC, ADTC, Iragenda. That is at the federal unit on there. That is the KC. That is the KC. The is the KC County construction is in north of 60 the KD Tiage land. Got that's the law. This on the KC would do that would the KC more than the Kegani Dendi. Taco Sanashu Industries Kegani de Ka Mandati quite as a gone. Is the pandemic to metase on the Honda de tears on the anything. Is that she was out good tears on it. Masi Minister, is it a killer? You go on the other tears on dinner. Minister, John the KG Minister, the Kaji the KG that is on Kamikuri, the Quincy Kazan. The 60 units NWT quarter the KG Housing Corporation the K. Dindia. Is it a garden at Talion? Because the down la you walk it, there was a direct here, you go to do like the cut in the masi.
Corporation.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Yes, this will be adding new stock to our current public housing.
Tilaka public housing are the two. Corporation is in car down the little Kegani de a sea corning on the end. Quota the case here. That the corporation is in. Ka Yagashi son by sea, son by Yasa like a 22, 23 Zekia. Tag Yisi County son by the Casey County Nigilia Tulia. Tatila. The main estimate the case at land. Ta ka Mago report at the layer. Ta Yini de Kasi Queenie de Kakwen, got a secure easy yet in the Masi.
needs a
Dani Zago Rani de Minister Situna Zekati, the Dante New the Azaka, the core investment funds Akialis. Masi.
Responsible for NWT Housing Corporation.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The corporation is currently under
Corporation, EGC, Kala, Yegalagan Dani Zawa, Taji the Keshu to come down the Gozogan de Zekayani. Da Gozani Shushi Yusaka, Kokeko on the federal funding Zekira Gozan de Gani de Zekasi, the unit Zekasi on Banigilia. Da continue Dani Zago Gani de Corporation Zekasi, members in a demo and it's in a good and the Tati, as he goes in his 20 is you are needed. Due to corporations in Sinaza Diondele, Kakala no Dene de Masombanaza in the Naza Karitia to the corporation to a jetagi ligini desi, in Duki Rago de Zidia, you own Galagan as a Kesa Goginisia, the federal funding the Keson by Sian. Got 25 million UK, Nagagin la Ijiteke unit, Sika Colamona the Yendi. Masin.
Oral questions. Member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I recently saw that the Northwest Territories Housing Corporation purchased the 24-unit Nordic Arms from Yellowknife School District 1. I was just hoping the Minister could update the House on what the plan for Nordic Arms is, both in regards to its...
With the plan la down to the Minister situate the government that it is the Kena at the end. That the case la the corporation the case one at the Lasa Katia. Cantico is the case as he la Bagaita Tule, Mentadi Quaita. Tandala Kaiko Tony Kekoginde. Teacher Kezi Maganda. Katant Oda Megason by DK down. Titayo Kaya teacher Kezi. You can't do Aitan. That the program serves the Kegaita, she and the Ka Magaita, she la do, she la Nahisi Magaita, don't eat the Kese on she. Could they don't need to choose the Kazalea? Could they share Magaita ni te Tule Senita? Can't you go Tule? Kala. E tanti senuita kakala megalaita no tenite te member meke me o me zeku sene e kunioni deni de taji de kasi me kondini zwan adio ya sansi e sete la sani te tule me o me zen meke me zena ko te dizeki ondi.
Member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I believe the Minister somewhat alluded to it there. I know the housing wait list in Yellowknife is hundreds of people long, but I'm just curious whether the plan is, since we brought 24 new units into the portfolio, is this an addition to?
That in Danity Lagati, the Yellowknife units are at the end. Get that department, Cotsanian shooting the Megaita go to the Keta the Casey. Cantico is the Casey 24. Jajan Dene said, Kala members, Netseketana Kotia, Nedesi, Kala tu Megasate, Lada, a Kuni de, Nuni de Katule, Netseketa, Nezeketa Kadesiatule, the 24 units, Zekatule Lisazal. Can't you do 164 C? Do Canete Setlaco Corporation di Dia, Kozagan di Atade Tia, the government see 164 apartment building Gucci and Dendi. Yaga. You saw any good on it that you is the kilometer send the machine. Masi said the Conde.
There's another 700 or so units that income assistance essentially pays the lease for people, and then there's the other $3 million that the Housing Corp then leases. And I'm wondering if the Housing Corp has ever looked into offering a long-term lease to either a nonprofit.
Long-term lease che la si tu le mecani tati northern funding che chianteni de si me che si che tu le in lende mortgage tats le che si tu le ji che o gainta ji che da mo go se si canteni de order na zatia tu le ji wala sindi masi.
Thank you. Minister responsible for NWT Housing Corporation.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I just want to inform the member as well too that the Housing Corporation has been approached by private industry as well too.
Private industry ka na wagi Housing Corporation tseko ginde dice kesio ko tsechu me tse ke tanti gala ta tse kesi ga zan da zo na tse contract na hergin la the Development Corporation che you ca tu le co galagandane. Cantini te tu le ti lisa che le quete che sigo.
I'm willing to take a look at that, and I'm willing to understand and see what else is out there here in Yellowknife, but just
Cimentati quanta la candi te oggi ya la via la che si ga tu le mo me che cade si che che. Ta ji candi go on.
Responsibility to be delivering public housing and with a lot of
the public housing gets any day.
With whoever he's referring to. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary, member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I guess, I find the leasing conversation interesting, but really at the end of the day, I think the solution is we simply need to build more public housing. Every time we build public housing, we actually free up units that we are currently renting. And there's just no doubt the GNWT is the single biggest driver of rent in Yellowknife, both through the number of workers it locates in Yellowknife and the amount it actually pays these companies. So every time we build more public housing, we fix and increase the vacancy rate, which is getting more and more.
Plan do public housing Yellowknife Dendi. Do federal programs other public housing songs a lot. Kota Chele ya Hutiku ta Jizeke. Ta Ajon members the Sikote Kadushine Tizeke. Kandi Teke ta Kadushi di Kala. Si koni si complex si Tiago Olendi. Candio Canada Housing Benefits si ka tule kozakendi jiteke adi. Meta tule rental at the lezekeni de. Jaka Yellowknife got a land. Izekea. He cleared the Kea on the alley. Could they tina and the Zeketi Honda? Ita Kala Megaita na heze capital ze keni de etanti ko seni tarni ta tanti sesi le ze kezi gaita public housing ko tana de ti editia na editia ko tlaza se la da na ze kage dia zgo
of the new builds in Hay River, and also in and looking at what we do have in the smaller communities and in the larger communities that need to.
타고 스레 코타고 차제 계지 가세 나오지 코엔제 계지 간디 카본 오제 제 가진데 고지 카메 프로그램 william 다 제제 계시 두 디테스나 테세 출근로 데모나 저러고 했는데 마시
Member for Cam Lake.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, my first question actually relates to what the member for Yellowknife North was talking about, and that's the opportunity to enter into long-term leases with different organizations, different renters, and potentially opening up doors.
Long-term lease 가잔다니 디야가 안다네 센디. 다 housing corporation 라 시칸디 policy 고자 디제 계신 디 간디시 고가기 레제 개인이 된디.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. You know, this really strikes a lot of work that is being done already with the renewal, and I'd have to get back to the member as well too, and just.
Member 이제께는 차 가야네 티다노 데니데 mentality 과인 다다 가니데 corporation인데도 뭐게다나제 뭐게다나제라고 했더니.
Very much, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, 2 years ago when I first asked about long-term lease agreements and the policies that went with them, I also asked.
기가인데 뭐 가야티래 디제께 DCNWT Housing Corporation 해 굴리 상하고자 이제께시요 코타제께 되고 이다 디 government이 기 에산티라 딜레 territory 손 바닥에 뛴데 특히 우티 가공지 뭐 그거전대하고 오늘 단지 따고 자 디제케가 아니데 policy에 진라 디제케진 시듈레 메타카즈데 추 그저 시듈레 간디셀라 간디네 organization이 고타티게네 된툴레 얘기대연데
Housing Corporation.
Thank you, Madam Chair, or Madam Speaker. Sorry, we are currently working with the with the Council of Leaders, specifically developed for addressing housing throughout the Northwest Territories. We.
Tilaka aronko galaita titseke mo kayani titseke jigo the federal government to ko galaita. Watandiu dadaja titseke gani te ka taro sitseke sin adindi osoni gut oni te tula sikoni kana ta. Kakala si sonsi gaita zon the policy teke. Tu sa tse on ta. No teni de member mo geta na gustene yende masi.
Member for Cam Lake.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, when we first sat in this House through our very first budget cycle, at that time the Northwest Territories Housing Corporation identified that our way forward was through partnership. And so I'm wondering if the Minister can speak to how many partners.
Dula tanete partnership na hetse kuye wo kaya tin le kuta te joditi. Tanete on the end.
WT Housing Corporation.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. That is, in looking at those partnerships, is something that I pride on within this portfolio. And when we had the
portfolio he tarnine chu that do housing unit asha goti kotashu agoda chiller go la gote tandi ko ga laita te kesi gaita ta ji te ke chote chule kandigo no teni te kandiu ka na jian de ji te ke partnership te ke ka ji human dadi shu asime ta de aji shu mesela.
Further investment, we've had our community housing initiative that we're looking at whether the community is identifying.
She and DC Laji di Gaganda, Tizek Kesia, Yundago. Ta Kandisha, a Ronza Kejo, says Chile Co. Ka, Megazana Tatula on the Jizeke. Kotse City organizations, you go Galanda, Tizeke, you Kaya Tizio. A Ronza Keziga Kala make a land.
Organizations as well too. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Final supplementary member for Cam Lake.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, this week we heard from the member from Nunakut, or in a exchange between the member for Nunakut and the health minister, that Tuktoyaktuk was unable to hire a community health counselor because they didn't have available housing. And so I'm wondering.
Jila Downty is a case, Downty Housing Corporation Tazego, is staff not get there the cases, Quago Zelendi. Jila Downty Aguzandia is the case you yen.
Minister responsible for NWT Housing Corporation.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. This is a question that was brought up as well too, like the member had said, but.
I can't remember not any. Kazokotin de Yechikandi, Kwen, Gozale, home ownership, government, Kwen, the Kandi Yako Lazeke, when Daddy Quantata, Casa College, Yakasegeti, is a Kyogoze make a kayak tea sets it, Tizekesia, Koze, Ta Roma Ryan Tati programs a casey, Ta is a casual. Ta te ko tin de gani de ka chong kandi si wo se che ka che ni ko de ji di ko je ke gani de kandi un te ko tin de ja gin de ni ze ko ni de ko hu le je ha tue na ta ge ti ji je ke yun da go gani de kandi mo da tin de ne jo di ti la da chi Teachers, Sala Tanaka, there is Yesata Tegolagua, Editia Seguitli as a coach is a case. The housing is a Kanduka, a Jean Metzini, corporation is a Katu, a Roy and Daddy Quaganda. A Gidi Zeke Quenes, who Lizzie, Tunaka, the Katukoa, Yutanigili. What's a December Zeku in Diasa land and the Masi.
Thank you, Minister. Time is ended for oral questions. Oral
question, okay, with a written question. Member Yellowknife North. Masi, Minister, she's a Taidu Kenneth. It's a case, Taiduke. Is a case lati, Nagot has a case in a Zekaget in Denizua, and SAG 2014 Zeki. Madam Speaker, Municipal Committee Affairs Kezia Rosila, Kamwana Zitesia Situna Zekati, is the Kezia Kota Zekelion. In Leni de Tizekesila, Kota Zekegani de Katula Zelele. Da Koti Tizekesi, a Kandi Zelea Tashi, Katu, Zekesi, Kandi get the Kesi, some baggy. Because any day as you are the Tizekesi, the tax on a CPI ta, gas tax. Diata Yedeke, you must. Mumphy. Madam Speaker, the case me go to Kadusianas. As you take 2019, the government is the NWT status chart book again la as you County Conezuko and DJ to take out in there. Taka member state that they cut a scene, yet take walking down Kietile. He to keep guy quago te lazy the reporter in la ministry. She do not say kati down the zeke gonna zugo and deal zeke is not a dezeke. You guys, she do go the kati. That's it. Minister, she indigenous government organization. Ko galan da ti gonna zugo and di social service zeke. Ne zu send out the lera mega reports estiatule. Minister shu si tule ko te kati si kone zu ko te gaudi si kone zu jugo New Zealand or the indigenous government te kesi ko te the health and social service te kesi Thai Minister in tule NWT health status chart bokasi o DC se estiatule the minister si tule na hete te kesi kan DC Northwest Territories te kesi aji dan DC the te kesi poor health te kesi kan di si tue yo kadi di masi Minister Housing Corporation Tekega, Madam Speaker, the KC da New Tunis, Northwest Territories the KC da New Tunis and the Masi. Minister Justice, as you the KC Oki da New Tunis, as you 2019-2020, got any day. The executive got the 2020-2021 the case you are saying the machine. Madam, you the mind spirit promoting health case constituted as a judge with a child and youth wellness plan is executive in the new Chinese and the Masi. Mofi. Is the case the good day choose the case in the new Chinese and the Masi. Those of motion. Monday, February 28th, this is the case. I got to the honor from member Harvard South the case 219-2 got the table document and got the status report the case government territories the case got the table document 5-6-19-2 annual status report 2019-2023 mandate government territories the case got the February 21st, 2021, January 2022 is the case the committee as a whole see the nagen with the end machine. Two committee of a whole decade they built 23 decade. Public Utilities Act they built 29 decade. Dene Zhatıé Bill 38 Zhatıé or Dene Zhatıé table document Zhatıé Yazotu Yike Yati.
Estimates with member from Decho in the chair.
Okay, I now call Committee of the Whole to order. What is the wish of committee? Mr. Member for Frame Lake.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Committee would like to consider table document 561-19 brackets 2 being estimated.
The declaration the Environment Natural Resources Northwest Territories Housing Corporation. Mashidi.
We will take a short recess and then resume with ENR. Take a break. Merci. Call the meeting to order. And we are still dealing with E&R. I'll ask the
Kala E&R the Kiathiti Minister Rasi, let's say witness any the end handy.
Would the minister please introduce his witnesses?
Minister, may I get these with the Canadian? Masi, Mr. Chair, Deputy Minister and colleague, the Masi Committee Home Force Management and Athite la Water Management Monitor page 87 go to any day 88 to the 90ish. Tatu ta go de ke ko ta kharchiane. Mr. O'Reilly. Masi the transboundary waters that get died do kenes. Is it a case? Megashu some bashi megasela chapter 2021 seke 14,000 is in. Say like the is it a kegan danes. Is it la tandia dio de yundi la tandia ka ya giant. Masi Deputy Minister at Indian. Masi Ekula Egalatin da 2021 case Ekula the Oza Goti da is transboundary Kula Tessini Targetenio Masini is it all goodly more at the end.
One of the big areas of concern for myself that I'm hearing from others is this proposed tailings, oil sands or tar sands tailings discharge regulations development. And I understand that we wanted to try to get some better engagement and involvement with oil sands monitoring. There's a body called the Oil Sands Monitoring Program Oversight Committee, and then there's some technical advisory committees that I guess work with that committee as well. And we, as I understand it, we had GNWT wanted to get some involvement in that committee so that we could perhaps even get better prepared for potential discharges. So I'd like to ask the minister whether he has indeed written to the government of Alberta requesting membership on this committee, these committees, and what the response has been from the
Is the provincial government la target indeed the transboundary waters that case or ending?
Chair, and I thank the member for this question. Yeah, we did write a letter to Minister.
Minister, the Alberta minister, the case, the do Salah sits in Alberta la key on this case in a getting the monitoring the case. Alberta na and deal that getting the Huti na with the Condigo is young Huti made Dion the Alberta was the two the Daisy. The administration cut the Jesila the other to the nights and a good teneketi. The government Alberta was NWT. Andu Alberta si editi Yewonaze Gogen Degain Le the oil sands Kesia. Kandi Mega Kondigun Lesian. Masi, the Tekayan team minister Masi, si Ejita Kezi Ganta, si provincial government, si EDTC, he won a second target in dialogities, come curation. Idea did go get the one. That is a case, the two the Kenny day, senior to lend the industry the case on. A city gala indicating the case membership segoginde. A yearana Nazata getting delay you on city Nazikan. Deputy Minister at Indian. She monitoring committee, all sands committees as well. Because Alberta was. I thought the transboundary agreement that I seguinde. Candigo Kala Dandi Esle Seguite di Tuze Casio Kala Kago di Dutsen was a Masi.
With all due respect, how can you be part of a transboundary agreement when the provincial government upstream won't even share information, won't even allow you to be at the table when...
Yeah, Tatana has like the Alberta government are going to transboundary agreements again. Sega Sule. That the federal government see it was a cause of the Andy. See a Gilgarish federal government. Government minister, she took with the Zeke, the Canada Zeke, any day. Kala could take with the Zeke, the government see a Titia Mogote Kaditi. The car minister, she may take with the Zeke.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks to the Minister for that. I guess I'd like to seek a commitment from the Minister that he's going to provide an update in this House before the end of this sitting as to what's...
Tiana Hute Zeki, the Minister, she tell when I didn't go to the end.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What I'll do is I'll make a commitment. Committee this taco the Kizu, take out a Siaco, you can go the Kotaton, tiny like Chita Hazati, the machine. Masi, Mr. Chair.
Questions for the end of this sitting on this matter, because the public deserves to know whether the provincial government...
Mr. Kata de Kiazago, because a kuni de kata go de kia, a kunioni dendi, public as go.
A couple of other areas here, if I can, Mr. Chair. I believe this is the part of the ENR budget where inspections for water licenses are conducted, and if I got that wrong, maybe the Minister can let me know, but how have we done with frequency of inspections, particularly of the diamond mines for the water license?
The water license diamond mine Mr.
O'Reilly, Minister.
Thank you. My understanding is we're still doing our inspections, but for further detail, and making sure I understand it correctly, I'll turn to the Deputy Minister.
Deputy Minister, you go Gunde.
Masi, Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The water license inspections are completed by lands officers at the diamond mines.
Diamond mine is the water license wasn't a choice. It is wrong to see diamond mine
on the timeliness of getting them to the boards. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci. Mr. O'Reilly. Minister.
Yeah, so as the Minister for Lands, I can verify that we do have our lands officers.
Ka land officers si kan tegi kan jesi ga kan daje koko target yen.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks to the Minister for that. I'll probably have some more questions when we get to the Department of Lands on this, on the exact frequency, so that's more of a heads up, but that's all I've got on water today, and I want to thank the Minister and his staff and yourself.
Merci. Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's my understanding that EIA is currently leading some work to lobby the feds to amend the MVRMA or possibly devolve the MVRMA, and pending the outcome of those negotiations, that would then allow ENR to resume work on the Waters Act and Environmental Protection Act. Can I just clarify, if that is the case, that we have to wait for that MVRMA work to be done before any further work on waters or environmental protection? Thank you.
MVRMA target hone tali koni tati water protection teki okuti at the end.
This answer to the member, but yes, you are correct.
See, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I recognize that MVRMA is both federal legislation and led by EIA, but I'm just...
MVRMA the federal
That is waters and EPA and obviously MVRMA. But does the minister have any update on when the MVRMA...
Minister, situ na te kadindi, night on, that all I kaganata di tuzeke and I get easy with a
Thanks. I can't speak for another department, but I can tell you from...
Yonaguli department go segale ko Taco tizeke la the deputy minister situlene tekati utiati tizeke.
Minister, with your permission, thank you.
Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't think we have an exact date at this time, but and I think that would be a good question for EIA, but I will comment.
Dula County, Kimiko de Sholo, Ka, MVRMA, KC, Diakana, go good de Short, Diaka.
And items ready to go. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I'm happy to hear that, and I'm sure I'll have questions for EIA when the time. There's been some rumors or possibly talk of some sort of corporate restructuring involving some possibly in our MACA or lands. One of the things that I don't quite understand is that lands officers and water resource officers are two different positions. I think they are very ripe to be.
Land and water, the case are killer good like it is the Mikuru Janis is you got the officers. The minister is the case to let Kati, the occasion in Lene Flagitita.
Minister.
Yeah, so. I just want to clarify that, we're talking about amalgamation, or the member is talking about it. We're not talking about that right now. We're not talking about positions.
Lazy deputy minister Water resource officer la water act was only kids la land water act land act doesn't good liagite. Can you resource management get any the security the case can't Gundli go sogerete. Nizeke, ENR zeke lason. The Ajiteke in Dazi Laka, Kandi officer Yagin Litizeke, Wakaya Tizeke.
When dealing with the diamond mines. So when it makes sense, those positions do the work of others.
오키 카그라 아기 데지 제케 다면 마제케 가니데.
Those, they're cross-appointed, is what I meant to say. But in general, that's the way that the split has occurred. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci. Are there any other questions from committee on this section? Mr. Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I'd just like to talk about the release of treated oil sand tailings in Alberta, and I guess it's difficult for me to wrap my head around the fact that we don't hear much from the government side on this.
The tailings ponds ke tushi dejati ki side la meta son the government the federal government na hidu deja na ni lion de ejite kesi e tuze kesi water rights ta mesela
life. And so I would ask the minister.
Minister, ejite kesi met the department. Situle, the Indigenous, the government is called Dada, Situle, Senina Ha. Ki Utli, the Taco Tizeke Alberta, Jesse Utli Naki, Nakese Onle. Heko, Aron the Keda, et the Goitiani de Dukai, Kayaki, Tiazon, the Tuzekation. Is that tailings ponds a key artist. Ta na hirka a rongo tako ne hitza ti tu woi ti an te go tin de ta ajila ta si te tu si Indigenous ku galaita ko te di claim da shila si me ta si ti itse ke ware sin se esi na te karushi ame sigere to te kesi tauti ti te kesi la tuisi ko te ni lisi na te ante ako ole kala tu kazale aji di tasi te kesi kana hirisi iji te kesi sila mo ko te public he ahliana Kandia Jitati, the Kizia Sierra Gaita. Katu Nahez Indigenous government issue could say Nazataketin. Jidao, Kago Ton, the Tuze Kizio, Kuite, Eko di Kov Tutiana Hilara Kitsinagucha. Tatua Jite Ketari, the Kizi, Rani de Tugo Tuin, the Karasi, and the Masi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'll start with the fact that it's the studies that are being done now at this point to be able to.
Dila commentari che se ne ta itaimo gunde ze kesi kan digo mo oita ze go ti a ro ze kesi a ji ze ni ze kesi kala ya ro mo gunde na hetzele kan digo a ji na hetze si la ka government si go ze gu de a kan di na ze go.
We have an Indigenous steering committee that has members from Indigenous governments across the Northwest Territories, and one of them is on the bilateral management committee with the GNWT.
The case that the bilateral agreement that Indigenous case we get set up. Calbera he.
This member as well, so they go to those meetings and they come back to
the water board the case Indigenous water board ke get easy you call meeting a get ya na tsana get ko cha ado asin je na ya je ami ze ke tu go seni den de ka kono ita kandi go a zona hika kandi si ta go ti je ke ta go ti je ke je mo gute.
It's important to note that the minister has provided briefings and responded to concerns from the Dene Nation as well as from the
Minister si la ka the nation target di je ke ju ko da to di tu je ke ta si lo ko ta je ke ji ke go inde da ta di Alberta si go na ya ti a tu da ka tu te go tin de yi si tani kagera aisi go na yai tira ka mega kondini to as Saskatchewan chu ze kaditi izeke wandi masi.
Mr. Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You know, we have these. I understand we have these agreements, and you know we have the claims agreements as well. Yet, you know, I look at case law, throughout Canada and throughout the U.S. and there's been issues that have arisen. So I just want to make sure that your department and this government is prepared.
The department, the government, is got a target. The two cases, na he do the the daisy come go down. That can this cargoes, seni target one day, Kagin la lane de Cordnicuni, the Atile, Thiazelian. That can dini de car, it is the son did I see. Oh, na hezogan de as go with it. Tu la ronde me tini liande. That is your waters. Mikio diazon. Na di dini na choose a ticket here.
We talk about fish and other wildlife as well. So I just want to make sure that it's front and center, and we're using everything we can. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci, Mr. Simpson. Minister.
Front, center, back, side, over top, underneath. It is very much a priority of this department, this government. I can guarantee you there's been lots of conversations, and the department is working very diligently with our Indigenous governments and with the Alberta government and the federal government to make sure that these transboundary water.
The government is got the transboundary guard, says it out, it's like a tiagite car, Mogote Kayati, Mogote Guite, down the Agonde Kisi. Can't do car co was idea, and it goes idea, co do la gala, night desi in nights on it's a Kisi, the nights again, the as a go, it's a K choosing. What's a two gargana tazake, tatan and I heads out. The Yeni Dega. These
things need to be addressed. Sometimes in government we're a little bit not as the speed that people want, but we are trying to do it.
Mr.
Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a word of caution, I guess, is that when you use a word such as guarantee, unless you've got 100% control over what's happening, don't use it. Thank you.
Let's see, Mr. Simpson. Any comments, Minister?
Guarantee that I'll listen to him on that one. Thank you.
Let's see. Mr. Simpson?
Questions?
I don't see any further questions from committee. Mr. Jericon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think this is a good discussion on this one here. I just wanted to let you know that I was also involved at the Mackenzie Valley Impact Review Board as a chairman for 6 years, and we also were really concerned about the water and transport.
Na shiga di chuze keji ogutli guite leku di water boundary teki ogute lesi o kosita keji o. Ijime kon diesi la kala metauda a nahi. Eku board review board keji kandi mogote ojinde di teki. Ita ta di keji la giant mind teki oshu. Ijishu. Ka ko
a decision that's based on the evidence and the people that were. I'm glad the minister talked about the agreements they have with Alberta government now and sharing information and so on. And it's still, you know, when I go back to my constituency and I listen to the elders and I listen.
Kala yegonagini di chujeke kona zede ko tailings pond go zeta. Ita de sago la sesini dazini kimori shole. The water license kede ko. Ita di du deko lindegi ni de nakiraka process na heze. Etan di chujeke license wazi chujeke siya. Alberta la down dison di kimikure sholendi. Tandida la tukegendi.
With the Mackenzie Valley Resource Management Act, the way we do business now is that they start putting security in, so that mining companies don't end up like Giant Mine. So I guess the question for me is that in Alberta, I'm not sure how far your
Alberta license, water license, keratare on Taichuan. Kote tandida la kwa didu sikamori shon.
In places in Alberta where, you know, the refinery, you know, I heard a bunch of stories about, you know, not.
All sounds like a castle, me gon die that. La jati, cantico la tantionte.
Is that, how do we get involved to make sure that we don't have another giant mine and making sure the water is protected? Thank you.
I see Mr. Jericon. Minister?
I'll start and then I'll turn to the Deputy Minister. We don't want another giant mine. However, we can't tell other jurisdictions how they monitor or how they.
Yonatane tako taza se la ye kauge de kiji tue ko ze kadi tiago on. Kandu kame gaita. Yi ze keisi on. Ka hi na he organizing ko ga laita ze go on di ze ke. Ita tanti tu ze keisi o di ze ke gani de ka me on kandi si. The Deputy Minister
Transponder agreement works. Thank you.
Let's see, Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we don't get to make the decisions about development in another jurisdiction, but
development the case or good delay. You only good lead the Kaguti. Can't you call Diti? That did the case here. Nakshi transponder agreement. Nahet. Ye here. Takon de keju kakon. Canada na one ageni sele Alberta adisi. One ageni then ijiteke. Ijita metana ganilla. Ita ijiteke la megaita. Tandi Nuti Azekiji Alberta go galaita. Matukazana tazekeda.
If there's any changes that are happening. And some of that is community-based monitoring, which involves.
Alakotazekea, Dizeke, Tuzeke, Wozen, Dizeke, Nide, Editiana, Zekake, Dida, Nazego Gende, Asizeke, Gazati, Nidendi, Tuta, Dita. The scientist true Nazata Gedendi, Dizeke, here, Ian Ardi, Agoget, Dize, Honda, Candida, and Lahetze, the Tukaneta.
To right now, the information they provide to us, we will be reviewing it and we'll have experts review it as well. None of the agreement itself does not stop us from being able to intervene in a project. Most recently, as well as some in BC that we've done previously. And the agreement doesn't stop us from having legal mechanisms available to us should the agreement not be able to, if we're not able to get to where we need to be in that case. So there's lots of ways that this.
Alberta di tiame con di desi many them. Jida Hardane Zoatule, Asikanita.
And work with Indigenous governments, as I mentioned in my previous answer, through all of those committees. to put forward our perspective and make sure that it's very clear what the residents of the Northwest Territories' interests are with all of these transboundary matters that are before us. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci. Mr. Jericon.
You just one more. I'm just thinking about the on the giant mine public hearing. We had many interveners or proponents, etc., like DFO, parts of the Department of the Environment, and all the Aboriginal groups, etc. So, so if you were to find in your reports and fish studies, etc., or water quality, you have an opportunity to probably work with the Alberta government and try to.
Alberta government water license the Department of Alberta.
Merci, Mr. Jericon. Minister.
For that detail, I'll turn to the Deputy Minister. Thank you.
Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So there are opportunities through environmental assessment and other licensing for us to provide comments.
Bilateral license, license ni chu ita kandia thiti kandil dani de Alberta romet la ko ka gondile na hyu ka kwa thiti as gon
Through those two ways that I mentioned, but we're not part of that licensing process specifically. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci. And I don't think there's any further questions. Ms. Knockleby.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I apologize ahead of time if this was already asked because I was up doing a meeting. So I'm just curious, I noticed that the department has, in the last while, or in 2020, released sort of a template now for reporting water quality sampling results, etc., in the Northwest Territories. And I'm just wondering,
department
thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks.
Merci, Ms. Knockleby. Minister.
For that detail, I'll turn to the Deputy Minister. Thank you.
Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we have our own remediation guidelines, and some of them are from different jurisdictions.
Guideline Northwest Territories Arctic guideline dathiti. They got in there, and then there's a dule like to kill the end.
Merci, Ms. Knockleby.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I guess, sorry, just one sec here. So under the, in the grants and contributions transfer, the water regulatory line there, is that just sort of a status quo amount? So that's not that they're like, you're not developing new ones, so that money's not going to new development. It's more just for the application of the regulatory guidelines. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Status quo.
Knockleby, Minister.
That detail, turn to the Deputy Minister. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the water regulatory is for review of projects, not for guidelines. So this is when we have
project was a case on the guideline of the Jitamo Kayani case. That report you make it a
Merci, Ms. Knockleby.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And is that a number that's generally like static throughout the time, or do we expect fluctuations based on additional projects coming online? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
There was a project method
Detailed Deputy Minister, please. Thank you.
Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So it depends on the projects that are
project
experts to be able to get the information we need to make sure that we're reviewing the projects properly. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci. Ms. Knockleby. Excuse me. Ms. Martzelos.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to, not very often I go in defense of a minister in a department, but I want to ensure that when I was chief at Salt River First Nation, we always had a dialogue with ENR and with the water quality regulations and the monitoring that was done within the department. And I know for a fact that even during the pandemic that water quality was happening and monitoring. And the First Nations were always involved, especially Salt River and the Métis, because they're from Fort Smith. And I know for a fact that the water quality in the Fort Smith area is top-notch. So I just want to make sure that that we don't get a wrong information from anyone that this is not okay. Okay, because I think that they also have workings with the municipality. And I remember when my husband was mayor that there was a letter written about the water quality in Fort Smith and how great it was. Okay, so it's just a comment. I'm not going to ask any questions, but I just want to know one thing.
Thank you,
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I see Ms. Martzelos, Minister.
And I thank the member for that. Yeah, we are working with them.
Regional office Kandio Ka, Zogo Dakanito, Kotaza Kizina Jogende Anide, Kajugo Nagini Zonde, Kana Jogende, a Kuridago Zangondiati in the Masi.
I see Ms. Martzelos.
I want to make one last comment. When I was the chief of Salt River First Nation, I just want to reiterate the working relationship we had with the Deputy Minister. It was an incredible, valuable relationship, and we had a lot of dialogue with the Aboriginal people. And I'm not asking any more questions, but I just want to make sure that people understand that the water is fine in Fort Smith. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any further questions from committee? No further questions. Please turn to page 88. Environment and Natural Resources, Water Management and Monitoring Operations.
Expenditure decade gatan tatu de 2022-23 decade 9,893,000. Committee kanalazo. Masi. Do Wildlife and Fish decade gatan page 91 for the 94 decade. Mega information items. It's like what's out of scene then. That's how the diality to now, Mr. O'Reilly.
Opening remarks, he said that there's an extra $1.03 million for work on the Bathurst and Blue Nose East caribou herds. I don't want the minister to tell me right now, but I want an itemized list of what this money is actually for. So can the minister commit to provide that and actually?
Somebody came okay, I teach a kilaji on the minister cutting the.
It's time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci, Mr. O'Reilly.
Yeah, okay, I'll give the minister 50 seconds if he can read it out quickly, please. Thank you.
Merci, Minister.
Thank you.
This has to stay on the sign,
So it's for herd composition.
Tekekatanta
North Slavey Wolf Incentive Program, wolf management actions,
Ajon tekesi la di program tekiande. Tuita contigo go la tekesi. Yante yendi masi.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks for that. If I could get the detailed list with actual numbers beside it, that would be great. I just want to know whether also,
Numbers ko taza se wala lani de masi yendi.
which is not happened,
The habitat protection teki jujura tandio de jitekyo ta du kenesendi.
is yet to be addressed. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Merci, Mr. O'Reilly. Minister?
In regards to the list and that, I believe we already sent it to committee, but if we'll check to confirm that we sent it to committee. And if we haven't, we'll make sure we send it again. But in regards to the habitat,
Committee just hitla jitekesio. The habitat tekesia kala gani tayendi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We are currently finalizing a framework document, operational guidance documents, and a desktop pilot exercise on mobile caribou conservation measures. And these documents describe the intent and application of these mobile caribou conservation measures in relation to mineral exploration activities. So there's a framework, an operational guidance document, and a desktop pilot.
Tila mega framework kote mega tandi si was in the message laude. Tandi nini to di mitizeke hoitizeke gasio. Di ho asi ko tan de jaga yen di daji teke ka ajonte me hoite di. Control government Athabasca shu ijajon di tia na tata ke di jakio yo again di.
And we're supporting other Indigenous governments and Indigenous organizations such as the Yellowknives Dene First Nation and North Slavey Métis Alliance to do similar work. And
this is all the Cote First Nation to Arona Tata get in Yati Kandisi, Mitzi Hoyt and Diande, Kandiant and the Massi.
Merci, Mr. O'Reilly.
Yeah, thanks. I was furiously trying to scribble all of that down, but I want to confirm for the minister. I asked for that information before, and I have not received it, the itemized list, so happy to get that from the minister. The mobile caribou conservation measures, this has been under discussion for probably 3 or 4 years now. The diamond mines actually do this.
Ita Megokaya Tite Gashila, Dean Tagai and De Logozali, Dila monitoring range planning teke, Taji Teke Gatanta, Hazome Tite Mikio Tite, diamond mine to Kakwageti. E down dida lea di te kesio. Hita tait ola di mete megaita the mobile caribou conservation te kegayani. Masi.
January 24th in regards to that. So
The January 24th a kote e di tle kote kaditi di te ke kambi si du kote ni te katsozi kote di tle lea dulendi.
in regards to the other question, with your permission, I'll go to the Deputy Minister. Thank you.
Merci, Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So,
Deputy Minister, Masi, Tite Kesi, Tayigo Kondesi, the pilot project on the Antigo Ka Metamiti with Tite Kesi Kandi targeti, Tati Kandiante. Handa the Jedi goes and I say, they come to eating Kakala Go Galaita.
Merci, Mr. O'Reilly.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Thanks for that. Yeah, this work has been underway for at least a couple of summers. I think that it might have been slowed down by COVID, but I didn't actually get a response to my question. When will we actually see changes that require mineral exploration in particular to actually shut down when there's caribou around their property? That's what these measures would do. Right now, the diamond mines do it because it's best practice. It's consistent with ESG that our Minister ITI keeps talking about. We don't do that in this jurisdiction, though it's voluntary. So is this department moving towards actually making this some kind of regulatory requirement? Thanks, Mr. Chair.
I'll see Mr. O'Reilly. Minister.
For that detail, I'll turn to the Deputy Minister. Thank you.
Deputy Minister
in place and make sure that they work and work with our partners on what the next steps will be. There is a likelihood that that could result in regulatory change, but at this point we need to get the pilot and work with the industry, with our industry partners.
Industry go galan tao the pilot project chuji ke o te ko tseji je ke zam ga ita z go ndi.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks for that information. So how do we actually get the so-called industry partners to actually do this if it's not an actual regulatory change? You just kind of look for volunteers, or how is that actually going to work? And would it be put in place in time for this summer? That's what I guess I'd really like to know. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
I'll see Mr. O'Reilly. Minister.
Detail, I turn to the Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To get this in place, we needed to complete the documents, which we've done.
Documents la mekega la ita ke ko department chu te ku te ijita khani te ko ni ta mekyo di chwa ji dan di han dia thi ti tu ko te ka la khan dia ko ke ni ze yen ni.
O'Reilly.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Maybe I'll try one more time. So are we looking for volunteers to do this, or is this going to be across the whole industry?
Industry na ke hindi tao na ko ke na hindi tao volunteer tao don't you want to yen ni.
I'll see Mr. O'Reilly. Minister.
Thank you. For that detail, turn to the Deputy Minister. Thank you.
Deputy Minister.
These are for exploration camps. There's already it's already in place in the wildlife monitoring and management plans, the WMMPs for existing mines. The EA process and the WMMPs formalize requirements for specific operating projects, and as soon as we're done internal reviews, I've already mentioned, we will be sharing it with industry partners.
Mr. O'Reilly.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm not sure I'm really getting anywhere. Are we seeking volunteers for this work? Yes or no? Thank you.
The volunteers need
for the Deputy Minister, please. Thank you.
Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's already happening with the mines under the WMM.
Do kako takoti mind NWT te kesi he katu kakoti koko ton kamuni ziandani.
Masi. Any other questions from committee? Ms. Knockleby.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess just further along these lines, has there ever actually been incidences of caribou or wildlife being harassed by?
Si tlagola di company ko zagu chati aroma za kwazan ta ze kesi chati ze kiasi liu jin ze yen.
Thank you. Not during my time, but I will turn to the Deputy Minister for.
Si jo itaji wo za ki se kagu chale ko the minister yo gunde.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. These measures are intent at the, how do I put this? The industry is working with us and understands.
Industry la kana he gala ganda di shukai kyo ke de jone si ja di ze te dan di mi ki di ze kyan na za ta ke din diale. O te di dia na za ta ke din dia si ja di sa cha thani te kana ze kha ke di. Ta kha gon dia che ga lai ta gu te tu.
Better managed to address caribou needs, and that's what we're working together on. The balance of protecting the caribou and still allowing exploration to happen, and there's a lot of positive work that's moving in that direction. In, you know, these documents.
Kala me ke kala ita kala che me ke kala ita hakala in da ni ze ma she ne se ti na tsagendi shati wo DJ ke ganden di masi.
Ms. Knockleby?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and perhaps just a moment where I should have been more careful with the words that I chose, in that I guess in my time in working in the field and on drill rigs, etc., it was fairly understood in common practice that we were not doing anything that was to impact or impede wildlife, including even going to the bathroom on the tundra at times. So I guess I just wanted to hear that, reassurance that there hasn't really been a problem here, and I am glad to hear that industry is working with the department. And
Masi Dene Zhatıé so industry department ko galagenda masi nesen. Hutli mo na ni se di chati ze keji ho di ho.
Really the biggest issue seemed to be was more just about clarity and how do they go through that process versus actual any issues with the processes itself. They just mostly want to know about navigating it and making sure that it's applied fairly across the board, so that they can anticipate things ahead of time and not have surprises. So I was just curious to know if that was the case. So thank you. More of a comment than anything, Mr. Chair.
Minister, you have anything to say? No? Good. Any further, excuse me. Ms. Whale on Armstrong.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. I know this will take a political whale. As a result of the restriction that is in place, when you look at it, it just seems like, okay.
Do it is clear, holy, clear choice la clear guys on. To le nakeze it is cleget. Is it a case in a kika, make your dicho. Can't it a case board as you are so the case the cleget, kakodicha. Can't you go? The mobile isn't or the clear holy.
Kilometers. That's the size of Klitschko land. And
Chonte at a chon canete Yazageta. Nova Scotia Cho.
That is in place. Just want to know if there is.
Candia New Guinea. Ita department is la situle, de Gea Ienguagele. The Metsike, Geotizeke, Kotaikalameti Diagite.
Gamity Ice Road, Winter Road is open, so those people are going to be traveling. And the Wigwit T2, it's going to be, the ice road is going to be opening soon. It is in the process. So the department needs to take into consideration when the people go hunting, they're coming from.
Then I call, not a zegani take Ludagite Nida Hagute. These
people are providing for their families in the small communities, and it's only once a year. So people in the small communities, they are already struggling as it is with the high cost of living, and the restriction is a burden. We
do Nakitita Gutiagu data sitana de Kela. That all a condition did Sati land Nezuati Mitijekio.
Problem for them, because they're not coming from like a short distance. They're coming, some of them, like in order to travel from Bichakun to all the way there, it's like 12 hours.
Kandi Mitiake Tende, Honda o Kisatze, on the Kata Sawa good. That is a case around Dani de Candia see the Yatiane, the stars called Atli. That Candida a Santiago Senitana or the Nezuandi.
To take that into consideration, there's not enough job and then not enough money for them to pay the court for.
Huni la Jani de Tijueli Kasuti Kolke Nagendia, Jayan. Yesterday
when I was talking to one of the young parents, she said, if my husband was not, my spouse was not a hunter, a trapper, and a fisherman, my family would be starving. And a lot of the small communities, they rely on the country food. And right now, because of the restriction that is in place, like I said, we do respect, the work that are being done. But what people would like to see is that from my conversations, and I talked to to the minister's assistant today before too. So what the people would like to see is that to give them a chance to reduce the
mobile zone la sashi, sashi, kandi ni deti tanesi kandi, etcetera que des kezi koni gut atule, koni la del de zekigal, ka na shuka, kokiasi.
The assistant said it's going to take like at least 60 days to get the word out. But we don't have 60 days. By the time that you guys do something about it, hunting season is going to be over. And then, well, not the hunting season is going to be over. It's just that the winter road is going to be out. So there's no, how are they going to go travel to the tundra? So that is the problem. So what I would like to see is that if the government that are with, can reduce the mobile zone, give people a chance to go out hunting for their families and for their community.
Si tu l'as dit mobile zone la sashi, de trace, qui lui t'a des tirs à des sites, et là que j'ai gagné, je vais caressiner.
Merci, Ms. Whale and Armstrong. Minister.
Thank you. I'll start and then I'll ask you to turn to the Deputy Minister. When I first became the Minister of ENR, the first thing I said to the department, I do not want to be the minister responsible for no caribou in the Northwest Territories. I made that very clear. As we are all aware, the Bathurst caribou herd is
tu sais que j'ai attendu, je sais que j'ai là 6,240, j'ai 470,000 in late 1986, 6,240. TNWT cost ye que departments in Kogal clean choita, could kadi diane, c'est des ketanagene jezekia. Koni gut azago, dizeke. Ta dizeke mobile zone o konde. Ejila ti o meta eji wekeji renewable resources ti board eti tiagin lara kandi ya ti ho liane koga laita. Clean cho government chu koga laita. Dizeke zi kandi zone asitla. Kasitla lende the others are song. Kala satis there. Taiji Honda Kazitlan. Mobile zone, the cat yazi lani de Kachuesa, Hutli Herjik de Dia. It are 6,240 caribou zone. Because Jim Ozezia, Deputy Minister at Indian.
Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So each week, ENR informs the public of the location of the mobile zone by sharing updates.
The Kandia Tlazi la Trichon on the lake, the zone public as it land. As Ronsi Kochako Tadni la Sitlala, it do me Tisina get do Genitze Gira Sitlan, but what the Hulias with Lelenitze, it's a case. Da Sizi la Catulum Kaisenise. Magota Kadichua Tulico, Suane Tezos, Songo Ole, it's a Kegaita on Kandianaki, government Sigo, the Chong government Zekagidindi, Kotanashugote, Mogote Kaditi, Dila Kandi, Asitla Ade.
Indigenous governments and organizations whose members have traditionally harvested from the Bathurst herd. And I'd just like to add at the end that illegals or seizures only happen if there's an investigation into illegal harvest. That's under the Wildlife Act.
Wildlife Act is
I think today we were talking about that too, about the seizure. Yes. Well, if the minister doesn't want to be known as the minister who got rid of all this Bathurst or known of getting rid of certain species, then I think he should change or do a cabinet shuffle, because that's not what the answer that we wanted to hear. And because some people are saying that that is not true. It's not.
Nakhinta kagucha tida meji wo dianigini o ehtion dele. Ki nane sila di minister sia situle kachuna te kadi etanti asikuzini si te kesion.
Who was the zone developed by? For the record, can you please repeat?
I see Ms. Whale on Armstrong. We just have to be mindful of our language and how we address ministers, making accusatory statements and whatnot. But, I'll pass it to the minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, the zone is our caribou, with our caribou herds, with collared. The zone was, the process was developed with the Clecho government, the ENR, and the
ENR, Clecho government, ENR, the case. I don't think I like down the DZK. This zone, the digital government, Charon. Ita ko te kuite te hona ta ti khandi ENR nigini wade.
On this, I would like to turn to the Deputy Minister. Thank you.
Masi, Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. ENR recognizes the challenges for those that are trying to harvest, and it's not just the Clecho government. And our minister met with each and every one of those Indigenous governments.
Minister, is the government is got a tada kagondi and the alcondio dele. Kadi tiago took the siati candigo or ecogeti. Nashi di teta harda si, or did that to say the kesitim, mediteke oin, what in the silla, come away diana. Naki di blue nose the kesu. A good age mediteke. Jesi la ka, who is jonte, titi, jitawa sit lad. We honor the Hina Jamatani la city or dele. Cantigo got Clecho government, Kyoke, the Tishuka, the Tishu got the hard dark on the seat lad. Taji the Casio. Taji the Casi Cantini de Ka, right as ago, tis a Casio. Monsieur, Mr. Chair.
Fish and Wildlife. Please turn to page 92. Environment and Natural Resources, Wildlife and Fish Operations Expenditure Summary 2020.
Resource Fish and Wildlife taking operations on by Sila 2022-2023 $16,147,000. Cover green. That do. Kati me oze Sila car 95 102 个真港掉的，他没西的。
Mr. O'Reilly.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So I'm looking at the information item on the Inuvik Water Board on page 98, and the main estimates amount for the Inuvik Water Board shows 0. I don't think that that's the case, but I guess I've seen what I thought were typos before and main estimates. Can the Minister tell us what's going on here? Thanks.
Let's see, Mr. O'Reilly. Minister.
For that detail, I'll turn to the Deputy Minister. Thank you.
The finance company can't get elegant that the Honda can't do more that yard.
Their budget in. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I see, Mr. O'Reilly.
Thanks. I guess when I look at this, I guess a bunch of dashes were loaded in. Are we actually, is there any money for the Inuvik Water Board then this coming year or not? Thanks, Mr. Chair.
I see, Mr. O'Reilly. Minister.
Yes, there is. Thank you.
Okay, can I ask how much? Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Merci, Mr. O'Reilly. Minister.
Detail, turn to the Deputy Minister. Thank you.
Deputy Minister.
And Dene Zhatıé, the 931,000 yen, the Deputy Minister.
Mr. O'Reilly.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I'm kind of curious. I don't know why you can't fix the main estimates, but over to the Environment Fund. It's on page 95. I know that there's an accumulated surplus over time, but the last 3 years, or next year, and then the previous 2 years, we're running a deficit there on an annual basis. So I'm just wondering, what is the objective that this fund is kind of being managed to? Are we trying to draw it down to get it back down to zero at some point, or what is happening? Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Merci, Mr. O'Reilly. Minister.
That detail, turn to the Deputy Minister. Thank you.
Shitayo tayo de keji Deputy Minister zekat ka tule magaita ze keji de ka tule kasitli kandigo Aurora College jaro ko zeku diazo Indigenous keji shu yen ida khani de ka tule me ke khaya ti.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci, Mr. O'Reilly.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Okay. Well, now that we're talking about the depots, Yellowknife only has one depot. It's out on Old Airport Road. It's not at a terribly convenient location. And I think it would be fair to say that I've personally noticed some degradation in the quality of service there, and that's not probably anything to do with the operator. But there seems to be some problems getting staff or people in and out during COVID. It's been, I'm sure, a whole set of challenges. I had understood that there was some work being done to look at a second location in Yellowknife. Can the minister provide an update as to where we're at?
Minister yo tiri la karukenani ti ze keji kaya ne ti tiagu te end Yellowknife ta.
Member is right. We have been looking into a satellite, but for detail, I'll turn to the Deputy Minister. Thank you.
Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're still looking into that, and the next step is to put out an RFP to talk about what kind of container could work.
Galata ze keji ga heni te ka Georgie Candici la Kamerago Dazo Candigo Agent Kegani de Ka Asici Candici la Ticati COVID restrictions the Honda Due Casit le Kokamago Italia.
So that you can maximize and have more people able to access that service. So there's work being done on both fronts. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci. Mr. O'Reilly.
Okay, thanks for that. Yeah, I can tell the minister that I visited Greenland about maybe 6-8 years ago, and in Greenland, in the capital, Nuuk, they had machines that you could just put an empty bottle into and cash came out at the bottom. So if they can do it in Greenland, I don't know why we can't do it here. And that was like a number of years ago. So is that the kind of remote technology or something we're talking about here? Like, this isn't rocket science. It's done all over Europe. But is that the kind of thing we're talking about? Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Merci, Mr. O'Reilly. Minister.
Thank you. For that detail, just turn to the Deputy Minister. Thank you.
Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're actually looking at a model where there would not be cash on site, that we would drop it off, you would have a card, and then there would be vendors locally that could pay out the card, or it would go directly into your account once it has been counted at the end and processed at the other depot. We've looked at options across the board to see what could work in our northern climate outside. We are now at a stage where we're looking at an RFP for how it could actually be constructed. So there is movement on this. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci. Mr. O'Reilly.
Thanks for that. So when is the RFP going to be issued, and when would it close, and when can we expect another depot or drop-off place or whatever? A little bit of a schedule. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
I see Mr. O'Reilly. Minister?
We're hoping to have it done in the next 4 months. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. O'Reilly?
No further questions, but I do want to thank them for getting on this. It's
Merci
Merci. Ms. Knockleby.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I just have some questions about the fur marketing revolving fund. I note that there's a $1,500 a year, sorry, $1.5 million a year authorized limit. Is that a, is that a cap that's based solely on like supply, or could we actually look to increase this, or would we then be looking at a drawdown of animals and such that it's not sustainable? Thank you.
I see Ms. Knockleby. Minister?
Thank you for that detail. I'll go to the Deputy Minister. Thank you.
Deputy Minister?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We could increase it, but to do so, we'd have to amend the Act. So what we've been doing is looking at it very closely. There's been some variability because of COVID. In particular, in the last while, we're getting turnaround as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci. Ms. Knockleby?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So would this be an area or an item then that we would look to maybe want to remove from the Act and put into regulations so that in the future it could be changed more easily without having to take a legislative change? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci, Ms. Knockleby. Minister?
That detail, I'll turn to the Deputy Minister. Thank you.
Understanding is that this is specific.
Public
with this fund the way it is for quite some time, and I think, like I was mentioning, that the anomalies are really because of some of the COVID issues that we're hopeful will resolve. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I think that this could play a really large piece back into sort of more of the traditional economy and such, and then as well as providing those supplies. And I just see that, I feel that our fur and our crafts and all of that is just a really untapped resource for the territory that we need to be looking at more. So I guess I just want to say that I support seeing more expansion of this type of a program, and then along the lines of what my colleagues were saying around the tanning and such, and the ability to produce hides that we talked about the other day. So more of a comment than anything. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Seeing no further questions for additional items, please return now to the department summary found on page 69.
69 on the KC2 Contigo the KC. It's our car.
Mr. Is this for the 69? Okay, the overall summary. All right, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you.
Mr. Johnson.
At least one piece of legislation. I'm just wondering if we provide Indigenous governments money to support their work being there, and if so, how much, or whether that's an EI.
Indigenous government is a
For that detail, I'll turn to the Deputy Minister. Thank you.
Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The technical working group is made up of IGCS Indigenous governments, which would not have their funding provided. And with respect to the non-IGC, IGS, excuse me.
IDS the indigenous government
by the Indigenous government, then there are not costs that are provided, which is what I think we have at this point right now. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. O'Reilly.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I don't have any further questions, but I'm going to, at the appropriate time, I'll have a motion to bring forward. Thanks.
All right, no further questions on this section.
Department Summer Resources Aggregation Expenditure to Department of 2022-23 main estimate $98,723,000. Committee Kanazo. Mr. O'Reilly. This is the motion is
The motion is in order. To the motion. Question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed? The motion is carried. Consideration of the Department of Environmental and Natural Resources 2022-2023 main estimates. Operating expenditures total department is deferred. Agreed? Thank you, Minister, and thanks to the witnesses for appearing before us. Sergeant.
Minister, the witnesses equal to Sergeant Arms Recording. Do go the you the committee do go the down Mr. O'Reilly.
We'll take a quick 5-minute break.
5-minute break.
All right, committee will.
Masi committee, do cannot Lucy. Car is 569 main estimate KC 2022-23 is KC Northwest Territories in Housing Corporation. Northwest Territories Housing Corporation is a information item to kala nagaita di KCO Department Kandigo Megoshi Kunamber Sesiho Kaketiani de Quinita Gogirik. Minister, Northwest Housing Corporation Zeki. See Sarusini. Mr. Chair Masini. Masi, Mr. Chair, Dutsen is 2022-23 Zeki main estimate Northwest Territories Housing Corporation. Arongo Zeni de clear guard the Kizim's annual budget Zeki 121 million. 4.8 million is he. Dago Zekazin la. DC la. Met a mandate get that in the Housing Corporation Zeki. Kotsesi di kandian de clear zane de continue ki azeki sombazik. Jizeki la kandini de 1.1 million sigala tantakam North Territories. Jizeki la 947,000 nisi operating funding clear kotseti kwezeki 164,000 property tax qualification or the year. 752,000 government North Territories the Hero Cattle Deche homeless shelter. 882,000 government North Territories is the 68,000 is in Kandiale. It's a Kani day Kakala 19 letters assembly Zata Dendi is a Kani day Ka federal indigenous government Zeke He got a Quinzeke Sishuga on Dazeke got a Tane Tuitagala Dazeke. Dia Sanzeke Rakandisi Ka send out the Izeke Kuziniti Zeke Dia Kandian. Diana at the end, Mr. Chair. Minister Lasin, Sikandi Dene Zhatıé in the end. Hamyagi te situ ko te kadi yendi. Masi. KC Community Housing Services, page 377, page 378. Do you got the question that goes to you, Mr. Johnson?
Love to be able to submit to these various federal funding pools, but they are not permitted to. Can we just explain why we won't let these organizations get money? Thank you.
The organization the
The local housing authorities run under a service agreement that is binding with the Housing Corporation. They are not government employees and they are not a non-profit organization.
Capital organization the
Deputy Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, and the minister is correct. Essentially, the LHOs are
Minister Tiati is the corporation zeke. Dala CMHC zeke tlande. Ita zeke kandida le kandida layendi. Di zeke siani. Tumi kega laita zeke sio.
Some of them being nonprofits and some being, essentially creatures of statute under the Act. Is this something we're going correct, or is there actually a reason for it? Thank you.
Chair, with the action of the renewal coming forward, we will be working very closely with the local housing authorities, but should they want to submit, they can submit through the Housing Corporation with our support. I'll have Mr. Jim Martin, Vice President, to elaborate on the response. Merci.
Vice President Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as the Minister alluded to, the authorities are established under legislation, whereas the
Mr. Martin, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I guess this happened long before I think any of us, even Mr. Martin. I'm just trying to understand if there's any reason why there is creatures of statutes, the authorities, and then nonprofit societies, associations with different powers doing different things with different reporting structures, and if there's any benefit to having.
Mr. Johnson. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So with our renewal, we are going to be looking at all policies and agreements throughout the corporation, and this is one of them as well too that we're working very closely with, and also reviewing our contract agreements.
Megaita no teni de members they make
Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, another kind of anomaly is they all somewhat have different appointment mechanisms. Yellowknife specifically, the mayor and a group of Yellowknife MLAs get together and we decide who is on the Yellowknife Housing Authority. Others are directly appointed by the ministers. Some have a bit more community input. This is according to some ministerial directive out of the 90s, I believe. But I really don't think it's my role to decide who's on the Yellowknife Housing Authority. And in fact, I would like them to be an arm's length nonprofit that perhaps some sort of membership has input on who sits on that board. Are we going to look at how we appoint people to these authorities and associations as part of the review? Thank you.
I'll see Mr. Johnson. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And that's exactly what we are working with right now. The other thing that I have noticed is you're correct that we do have some Indigenous groups that do have representation on these boards. We do have forms of leadership as well too, but we're looking at pursuing those changes. One of the things that I have mentioned to when re-electing the board of directors, I guess, is that I don't want them to serve more than 2 consecutive terms. So I've made that very clear throughout the Northwest Territories, but going forward we will see a more streamlined, clear approach when we're dealing with the LHOs. And if we're looking at those changes and there's no relevancy to having those representation in selecting the boards, then we will be working closely with the LHOs throughout the territory. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Merci. Mr. Johnson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess what I envision happening here is probably not a one-size-fits-all model. I think some Indigenous governments probably want to take over the LHOs and run that maintenance function. I personally, in Yellowknife,
the Indigenous government
DevCorp, anyone, or in fact just bring them into the Housing Corp. And I know there's a lot of cost in having these LHOs. They each have an office, they each have staff, they each have an admin, they each have a board. And, you know, I think a review of, I guess I'll just speak on behalf of Yellowknife. I'm not sure that we're getting the benefit there, considering they're not actually allowed to make any decisions about applying for funding or buying units or even who we lease from. So in reviewing this, are different options on the table? Can we perhaps, you know, look at some cost savings or just, you know, a variety of models of how we provide, you know, essentially the maintenance and property management and the collection of rents in communities? Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I see Mr. Johnson. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for that comment. I can bring that back to the department, but I want to be very clear that with the function of these LHOs, and they're allocating the units at the ground level, and 80% of our budget is actually allocated to the smaller communities, so outside of Yellowknife. I just wanted at the community level, where they make the decisions.
Only data on is your idea. Candia CC Gaganeta, Ajitini de Kesi, Candia the Ozen is Tasi Candizi, chairperson Tago Teni de Yamatan Yochune.
Work at the smaller community level or even in the larger centres. This is the board and this is the structure that I would like to be working with. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I guess I'm going to say that I will offer no opinions on what I think LHOs in the communities should do. I'll leave that up to community MLAs and them. But I noted in Yellowknife, the staff, they're not public servants, and they have quite, you know, high maintenance costs. They're nowhere near the private sector and what it costs to maintain and operate buildings. You know, perhaps that's a good thing, and the number of staff they have if you need to get something fixed in a public housing unit in Yellowknife. But I'm just wondering if we've done some sort of cost comparison of different options, or is it cheaper essentially to have LHOs with staff who are not GNWT public servants? Is that part of the reason for their existence? I'm just kind of confused.
Mr. Johnson, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this has been something that has probably been, you know, functioning in the smaller communities and in the larger centres for quite some time. I'm not too familiar with the history and why we created the LHOs and why there is the board structure. I will.
President Young.
Like the minister, you know, my background was actually initially with an LHO here, and even I can't explain some of the rationale about why it was created because it predated me. But in my time here, I've seen a lot of ebb and flow about levels of responsibility to LHOs, and it's very much changed with the government relationship over time, and sometimes there's been more responsibility locally, and other times there's been other things. So I think that's part of the reason. These are different structures, but also, as you've alluded to, in some cases, Indigenous governments may want to take the LHO over and sooner, and in other cases they may not. And we've started to hear some of that conversation as part of our engagement on the renewal. So I think whatever we come up with as part of the renewal has to be able to be flexible enough to accommodate some of these different situations that are going to evolve.
Ms. Knockleby.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just, want to continue on with this conversation. I too find this all to be quite confusing and think that it definitely needs to not be a one-size-fits-all answer. Because for me, if an Indigenous organization is doing it, that's great. We're going to empower them and them to take care of their people. But in Yellowknife, I find it hard because I don't know how I can ask or intervene because it is a third-party entity, and it doesn't make sense here because we don't have an entity that's, an Indigenous or government that's specific to Yellowknife itself. So I also agree that some sort of change for maybe Yellowknife and efficiencies could be found, and then, yes, leave communities to come up with their own solutions for that. My question, though, is around the apprenticeship program here. I'm glad to see there's more money there, I'm so blind, between from the 2020 actuals to now, but I guess my question is, knowing that apprenticeship programs and such are a continuum and they, there's a 3-4 year type situation that goes on, how do we make sure that we're being efficient and not losing apprentices out of the system? Of an apprenticeship program without actually getting to be apprentices. And I'm wondering what mechanism, getting to be journey people, and what mechanism is being used to kind of track that efficiency. I'm not sure if I really explained that well, but maybe the Minister, Deputy Minister can comment. Thank you.
Merci, Ms. Knockleby. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And apprenticeship is highlighted in our contracts going forward when we're putting out we have such a huge unit delivery this year. So then I think the last number that I did have, and Jim could correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we had 19 apprenticeships altogether. And currently right now we do have apprenticeships that are required through those contracts. And the other thing is that we do have such a large construction delivery that I would like to see that opportunity for who's entered into those apprenticeships be able to move on to the existing projects going forward.
Continue the Zola, the contract is Guanita, Cantico is a tiny day to Magaco Tatandia Zigalas and Tataki apprenticeship to Kigani. Kamega certificate could say as a go yen.
Response. Thank you.
Merci, Vice President Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the Housing Corporation does continue to certainly support apprentice hires here in the NWT.
Housing Corporation
We've seen 21 apprentices journey certified.
21 apprentices got up to
In addition to our in-house program, the Housing Corporation has also introduced back on April 1st, 2020, a requirement for our general contractors to establish at least one apprenticeship work assignment for each of our contracts. So to date, we've supported 33 work assignments with the contractors. So between a combination of the contractor work opportunities and attrition in our LHOs, we're quite comfortable in saying that the LHOs that
Merci, Ms. Knockleby.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for that answer. And I guess I'm assuming that with an apprenticeship program that it's not always tied specifically to the employer, but is an overarching program. And I see people nodding their heads yes, so that's good. I guess that was where my concern is. I'm just looking at the training and support workshops line. There's only the 2,000 spent in 2020-21, and then back up to 250. I'm assuming that these numbers are so low because of COVID. Could the minister confirm that from the 2020-21 actuals? Thanks.
Let's see, Ms. Knockleby. Minister.
Madam, thank you, Mr. Chair.
2021 to 2022 to Kizia. Itandia dea guchaji to Kayendia. The minister at the Tisina the training Sika Kotagetika Galagi de Kandu the COVID Hona Huki dea gucha the end.
Chair.
Merci, President Young.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and that's correct. You know, with unfortunately with travel restrictions, many of our folks have not been able to.
Di Tennessee County si ko ko ne te ke ni te tu ko nya ki te ke te tia gu te da di COVID se hone da ne. Ji da sha gu cha.
Formal training, as noted through educational institutions, but even our regularly scheduled workshops to do training for LHO managers, tenant relations officers, foremen, those things which normally the corporation would sponsor at least once annually, we've not been able to do over the last 2 years. And so that's something we need to now catch up on and bring those folks back together to do some of the basic training that we would normally deliver to those cohorts and build that network amongst the people doing that job in the community.
COVID se hone da mi ko ko ne thon le si tu ga ru mo wo ta da kan ti ko wan yu ni te.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And yeah, that I would expect. I guess then leading to my next question would be, has there been an ability or an interest or looking at what it would cost to put some of these programs on, put them virtually? And could they even be put virtually because it is a trade type or some of it is very hands-on training? And then as well too, I think this is a great way to support skill sets. So or to increase capacity within communities. So is there a want to increase this funding over the next while?
The other some mechanics le le down the training che ke ga ni de kan dia la down dia yan.
Thank you.
Merci. Ms. Knockleby, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll have President Young elaborate on the response. Thank you.
President Young.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think this is one of the items that we're very much looking forward to having a conversation with the LHOs about, to talk about both the style of delivery, but what we're delivering and whether we're delivering enough. I think in the House before, we've talked about client-centered service training for our frontline staff. That's something that we need to start delivering and develop and deliver across. So we may look to do face-to-face initially, but then that could be something that could be, as new folks come on stream, become more of an online.
You know, they any them that quite that was that can eat tiny take out to them or Jenna Cote. And you see, senior to teach a cake I intend.
Chair.
Merci. Ms. Knockleby.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the Deputy Minister's response, or sorry, the President's response. You know, I can't stress enough how often when I am talking with my constituents that are housing clients, how really a lot of it comes down to how they feel they've been treated, and often they feel that they've been disrespected or that there's been a rudeness. And I mean, I get that frontline workers also have a burnout and a need to almost protect themselves in a way by having a little bit of a maybe reserved or removed manner. However, I feel that, you know,
Merci, Ms. Knockleby. Minister, you want
Just a comment, and I appreciate the members' comments as well too, because training is something that I really want to be identified for our LHOs and to support them, whether it be from client service to, you know, the finance, and I'm kind of looking at as
Merci, Minister. Committee. Oops. Ms. Knockleby.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to make one last comment. I appreciate the Minister's comments around the training and awareness. A new thing that I've recently had a constituent make me more aware of, where we're often talking about trauma-informed approaches to things, but I think we also need to have an FASD approach to our work, and it's going to be something that you're going to that training that needs to be a part of that as well. Thank you.
See, Ms. Knockaby. Committee, we're got our hard stop. I've got a member from Frame Lake. What is the wish of committee?
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I move that the chair rise and report.
The
motion is non-debatable. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion is carried. Will the Sergeant at Arms please escort the witnesses from the chamber? Report progress.
May I have the report?
The committee of a whole occasion, Madam Speaker, committee CCA 22-20-38 occasion, the do call 561-19 to 2022-2023 occasion main estimate. That is the occasion progress to send it.
Madam Speaker, I move that the report of the Committee of the Whole be concurred with. Merci.
Thank you. There's a motion on the floor. Can I have a seconder? Member for Nunukput. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. Orders of the day. Mr. Clerk.
Orders of the day for Friday, February 25th, 2022, 10 a.m. Prayer, minister statements, member statements, returns to oral questions, recognition of visitors in the gallery, replies to budget address, day 4 of 7, acknowledgements, oral questions, returns to written questions, replies to commissioner's address, petitions, reports of committees on the review of bills, reports of standing and special committees, tabling of documents, notices of motion, motions, notices of motion for first reading of bills, second reading of bills, consideration in committee of the whole of bills and other matters, Bills 23, 29, 38, and table document 561-19-2. Report of Committee of the Whole, third reading of bills, orders of the day.
Thank you. This House stands adjourned until Friday, February 25th, 2022 at 10 a.m. Order.